Hey, dear listeners, welcome to our podcast, powered by the wonderful world of AI, where we dive into the fascinating cultural differences between two amazing countries. I'm Mira, and I'm super to be here today with my co-host, Leo.
Yeah, and I'm stoked to be back on the mic with Mira after our last episode, where we had a rather interesting experience. Let's just say it involved a coffee spill, a few wardrobe malfunctions, and a very entertaining story about a coffee chic fashion brand.
Oh, Leo, you're always good for a laugh. But before we dive into today's topic, I want to share a funny story from our previous podcast. We were recording an episode about family-friendly environments, and I was trying to demonstrate how to navigate a children's play area. Let's just say it involved a lot of giggling, a few bumps, and a very embarrassed Leah.
Ah, yeah. I remember that episode. You were like a kid in a candy store, Mira, and I was just trying to keep up with you. But, of course, that's what makes our podcast so much fun, the unpredictability and the laughter that ensues.
Exactly. And speaking of fun, today we're going to explore the wonderful world of Lithuania and Seychelles, two countries that are vastly different, yet equally fascinating in their own ways. From the stunning beaches of Seychelles to the charming cities of Lithuania, we'll delve into the unique cultures, traditions, and ways of life in each country.
That's right. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to learn more about these two countries. Whether you're planning a trip, considering a move, or simply curious about the world, we've got you covered. Our podcast will be a comprehensive guide to help you make informed decisions and get a deeper understanding of what each country has to offer.
So, let's get started. Today's topic is 1. Introduction to Lithuania and Seychelles, and we'll be covering a range of topics, from safety and economy to education, nightlife, and family-friendly activities. We'll also be sharing our own personal experiences and insights, as well as some fun facts and anecdotes to keep things engaging and entertaining.
And of course, we'll be answering all the questions that are on our listeners' minds. Whether you're wondering about the cost of living in Lithuania, the best beaches to visit in Seychelles, or the cultural differences between the two countries, we'll do our best to provide you with the information you need to make an informed decision.
So, grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and get ready to embark on a fascinating journey with us through the world of Lithuania and Seychelles. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more exciting episodes and behind-the-scenes content.
And, as always, we're brought to you by the wonderful team at AI, who help us make this podcast possible. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode.
So, Lithuania, the Baltic gem with a safety record that's hard to beat. I'm certain that our listeners living in this country would agree with me. It's one of the safest countries in Europe, with low crime rates and a strong focus on community policing. But let's dive deeper, shall we?
Ah, yes. Lithuania's got a reputation for being a haven for tourists and locals alike. But, Mira, I've heard some whispers about pickpocketing in the capital city, Vilnius. What's the story behind that?
Well, Leo, it's true that Vilnius can get crowded, especially during peak season. But, like in any major city, it's always a good idea to keep an eye on your belongings. The Lithuanian authorities have also taken steps to increase security measures, such as installing CCTV cameras and improving street lighting. I'm sure our listeners would appreciate the efforts to maintain a safe environment.
That's true. Mira, but what about the impact of tourism on the local culture? I've heard that the influx of visitors can sometimes put a strain on the community. How do the Lithuanians handle this delicate balance?
Great point. Leo, the Lithuanians are indeed aware of the potential risks associated with mass tourism. However, they've implemented measures to mitigate the effects, such as regulating the number of tourists and encouraging responsible tourism practices. It's all about finding that sweet spot between economic growth and cultural preservation.
That's fascinating, Mira. Now, let's move on to Seychelles. the archipelago of islands in the Indian Ocean. I've heard that it's a paradise for beach lovers. But what about safety concerns? Have there been any notable incidents in the past?
Ah, yes. Seychelles. The island nation has a relatively low crime rate compared to other countries in Africa. However, as with any popular tourist destination, there are some areas that are considered safer than others. The authorities have taken steps to improve security, including increasing the presence of police patrols and implementing a 24/7 emergency response system.
That's reassuring. Mira, but what about the impact of crime on the local community? I've heard that there are some areas in Seychelles where poverty and unemployment are prevalent. How do the authorities address these issues?
Excellent question. Leo, the Seychelles authorities are indeed aware of the challenges posed by poverty and unemployment. They've implemented programs to address these issues, such as vocational training and job placement initiatives. It's all about creating opportunities for the local community to thrive.
I see. And what about the role of tourism in Seychelles? How does it contribute to the local economy? And what are the benefits and drawbacks?
Great point. Leo, tourism is a significant contributor to Seychelles' economy, generating revenue and creating jobs for the local community. As with any country, there are concerns about the impact of tourism on the environment and the local culture. The authorities are working to strike a balance between economic growth and environmental preservation.
That's a great point, Mira. And finally, let's talk about the cultural factors that shape safety and crime rates in both countries. What do you think are some of the key factors that contribute to Lithuania's and Seychelles' respective safety records?
Excellent question. Leo, I think one of the key factors is the strong sense of community in both countries. In Lithuania, there's a strong tradition of social cohesion, and in Seychelles, there's a sense of island solidarity. This sense of community helps to prevent crime and promotes a culture of safety.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on education and social welfare. This helps to create a more informed and responsible citizenry, which, in turn, contributes to a safer environment.
Absolutely. Leo. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners, what do you think are some of the key factors that contribute to safety and crime rates in Lithuania and Seychelles? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below.
That's all for today. Folks, thanks for joining us on this journey through the world of general safety and crime rates. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you in the next episode.
To dive into the world of politics in Lithuania and Seychelles, we all know that a stable government is crucial for expats. But how do these countries compare? I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this.
Great point. Mira, Lithuania has a parliamentary republic system, while Seychelles has a presidential system. That's quite a difference, isn't it? I'm not sure which one is more stable, but I do know that both countries have their own unique challenges.
Yes, exactly. Lithuania has a more established democratic system, but Seychelles has a more presidential approach. What would happen if an expat lived in each country? Would they notice a difference in the way the government functions?
Well, I think expats would definitely notice the difference. In Lithuania, the government is more transparent, and there are fewer opportunities for corruption. On the other hand, Seychelles has a more centralized government, which can sometimes lead to inefficiencies.
That's a great point. Theo! And speaking of inefficiencies, I've heard that Seychelles has a reputation for being quite bureaucratic. Have you heard anything about that?
Yes. I've heard that Seychelles has a lot of red tape, which can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system. But, on the other hand, Lithuania has a more streamlined process, which makes it easier for foreigners to integrate.
I see what you mean, Leo. And I think it's interesting to note that both countries have a strong sense of community. In Lithuania, the concept of Baltic solidarity is quite strong, while in Seychelles, the community is very tight-knit.
Exactly. And I think that's because both countries have a strong sense of history and culture. In Lithuania, the country has a rich history of resilience and perseverance. While in Seychelles, the community is built on a strong sense of island culture.
That's so true, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of social harmony. In Lithuania, the concept of social cohesion is quite strong, while in Seychelles, the community is very welcoming to expats.
Ah, yes. And I think that's because both countries have a strong sense of community and social responsibility. In Lithuania, the community comes together to support each other, while in Seychelles, the community is very supportive of its expat population.
I love that, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of civic engagement. In Lithuania, the government is very transparent, and citizens are encouraged to participate in the democratic process. In Seychelles, the community is very involved in local politics.
Exactly. And I think that's because both countries have a strong sense of civic responsibility. In Lithuania, citizens are encouraged to participate in the democratic process, while in Seychelles, the community is very involved in local politics.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jeton AI for more in-depth analysis on the political stability and social harmony in these countries.
And remember, folks, if you're an expat living in Lithuania or Seychelles, we want to hear from you. Share your experiences and thoughts with us in the comments section.
I'm so glad we could have this conversation. Leo, it's clear that both countries have their own unique strengths and challenges when it comes to political stability and social harmony.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's great that we could have this discussion and provide our listeners with a more nuanced understanding of these countries.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning into our podcast.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast for more in-depth analysis on the topics that matter most to you.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out to us social media or in the comments section.
And remember, folks, if you're an expat living in Lithuania or Seychelles, we want to hear from you. Share your experiences and thoughts with us in the comments section.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jeton AI for more in-depth analysis on the political stability and social harmony in these countries.
And finally, I just want to say that I'm loving the conversation we're having today. It's so great to be able to discuss these topics with such a knowledgeable and insightful guest like Mira.
Thank you. Leo, I'm having a blast chatting with you too. And I think our listeners are really going to appreciate the insights we're sharing today.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning into our podcast.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast for more in-depth analysis on the topics that matter most to you.
And finally, I just want to say that I'm loving the conversation we're having today. It's so great to be able to discuss these topics with such a knowledgeable and insightful guest like Mira.
Thank you. Leo, I'm having a blast chatting with you too. And I think our listeners are really going to appreciate the insights we're sharing today.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning into our podcast.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out Jeton AI for more in-depth analysis on the political stability and social harmony in these countries.
And remember, folks, if you're an expat living in Lithuania or Seychelles, we want to hear from you. Share your experiences and thoughts with us in the comments section.
I'm so glad we could have this conversation. Leo, it's clear that both countries have their own unique strengths and challenges when it comes to political stability and social harmony.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's great that we could have this discussion and provide our listeners with a more nuanced understanding of these countries.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning into our podcast.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast for more in-depth analysis on the topics that matter most to you.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out to us on social media or in the comments section.
And remember, folks, if you're an expat living in Lithuania or Seychelles, we want to hear from you. Share your experiences and thoughts with us in the comments section.
For more insights like this, don't forget to check out. Tap into the economic conditions and cost of living in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious to know, Leo, what's the job market like in Lithuania? Is it a great place for expats to find work?
Lithuania has a growing economy, with a strong focus on IT and technology. Many international companies have set up shop here, and it's become a hub for software development and outsourcing. But let's be real, Mira, the job market can be a bit unpredictable, like trying to find a decent PROG in Vilnius.
Well, I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with you. Leo, but seriously, what about the cost of living? Is it relatively affordable compared to other European countries?
Yes. Lithuania is actually one of the more affordable countries in the EU. Rent, food, and transportation costs are relatively low, making it a great option for expats on a budget. Although, Mira, I have to warn you, the prices can vary depending on the region. Vilnius is a bit more expensive than other cities, but it's still a great value compared to Western Europe.
That's great to know. Leo, no. Let's move on to Seychelles. I've heard it's a beautiful island nation with a high standard of living. But what about the cost of living? Is it more expensive than Lithuania?
Seychelles is definitely a more expensive destination. Mira, the cost of living is high due to the island's remote location and limited resources. However, the quality of life is also very high, with a strong focus on tourism and a growing economy. But be warned, Mira, the prices can be steep, especially when it comes to housing and food.
I see. So, it seems like Seychelles is more geared towards luxury tourism and high-end expats, while Lithuania is more of a hub for entrepreneurs and tech-heavy expats. Is that a fair assessment? Leo?
Well, I think that's a fair assessment, Mira. But let's not forget, Seychelles has a lot to offer in terms of natural beauty and outdoor activities. And for those who can afford it, it's a great place to live and work. But for those on a tighter budget, Lithuania might be a more practical choice.
That's a great point, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the job market in Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. The job market in Seychelles is growing, but it's still a bit limited compared to other destinations. However, there are opportunities in the tourism industry, as well as in the healthcare and finance sectors. And with the government's focus on diversifying the economy, there are also opportunities in areas like renewable energy and IT.
That's great to know, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners would also love to know more about the cost of living in Seychelles. Can you give us some examples of typical expenses?
Sure. Mira, a one-bedroom apartment in Victoria, the capital city, can cost around $1.502. So I think that we can cover that $0 per month. And a meal at a mid-range restaurant can cost around $20.30 per person. But let's be real. Mira, the prices can vary depending on the location and the type of accommodation.
I see. So it seems like Seychelles is definitely a more expensive destination than Lithuania. But what about the quality of life? Is it worth the higher cost of living?
That's a great question. Mira, and the answer is, it depends on your priorities. If you value a high standard of living, beautiful beaches, and a relaxed atmosphere, then Seychelles might be the right choice for you. But if you're on a tighter budget or prioritize affordability, then Lithuania might be a better fit.
I think that's a great summary. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the economic conditions in both countries. Can you give us some final thoughts on this topic?
Sure. Mira, I think the key takeaway is that both countries have their pros and cons. Lithuania offers a more affordable lifestyle and a growing economy, while Seychelles offers a high standard of living and stunning natural beauty. But ultimately, the choice between the two will depend on your individual priorities and circumstances.
Well, there you have it, folks. I'm sure our listeners will have a better understanding of the economic conditions and cost of living in Lithuania and Seychelles. And if you have any comments or questions, please let us know in the comments below. Thanks for tuning in. I'm sure our listeners are curious about the types of accommodation options available in Lithuania. From apartments to houses, and even villas, the range is quite impressive. I've heard that Vilnius, the capital city, has a lot to offer in terms of luxury apartments with modern amenities.
Oh, yes. And I've read that Vilnius has a growing expat community, which is great for networking and finding like-minded individuals. But let's not forget about the more affordable options, like shared apartments or guest houses, which can be a great way to meet locals and experience the culture.
Exactly. And Lithuania has a well-developed public transportation system, making it easy to get around without a car. I'm sure many expats would agree that having access to reliable public transport is a major plus when looking for accommodation.
Absolutely. And Lithuania's public transportation system is also relatively affordable, which is a bonus. But I'm curious, Mira, what about Seychelles? What kind of accommodation options can we expect to find there?
Seychelles. What a paradise. The island nation offers a wide range of accommodation options, from luxury resorts to budget-friendly guest houses. And, of course, the beaches. Oh, the beaches are simply stunning. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of accommodations available in Seychelles.
Yes, and I've heard that Seychelles has a strong focus on ecotourism, which is great for nature lovers. But let's talk about the prices. Yeah, I've read that Seychelles can be quite expensive, especially when it comes to luxury accommodations.
Yes. Seychelles does have a reputation for being on the pricier side, but I think it's worth it for the unique experiences you can have there. And let's not forget about the island hopping opportunities. I'm sure many expats would love to explore the different islands and cays.
Island hopping sounds like a great way to experience Seychelles. But I'm curious, Mira, what about the infrastructure in Seychelles? Is it well developed and easy to navigate?
Yes. Seychelles has made significant strides in terms of infrastructure development. The main island, Mehe, has a well-maintained road network, and the capital city, Victoria, has a range of amenities and services.
That's good to know. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the cost of living in Seychelles. Is it relatively affordable, or should expats be prepared for a higher cost of living?
Yes. Seychelles can be quite expensive, especially when it comes to food and transportation. But if you're looking for a unique and luxurious experience, it might be worth it. And let's not forget about the stunning scenery and beautiful beaches.
I think you're right. Mira, Seychelles is definitely a unique and special place. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of accommodations available in Seychelles. Can you tell us more about the luxury resorts and villas?
Yes. Seychelles has some of the most beautiful and luxurious resorts in the world. And the villas. Oh, the villas are simply stunning. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different options available.
I'm sure they would. And I'm curious, Mira, what about the more affordable options in Seychelles? Are there any budget-friendly accommodations available for expats?
Yes. Seychelles has a range of budget-friendly accommodations, from guest houses to hostels. And I've heard that some of the guest houses are actually quite luxurious, despite being more affordable.
That's great to know. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of accommodations available in Seychelles. Can you tell us more about the guest houses and hostels?
Yes. Seychelles has a range of guest houses and hostels, from budget-friendly options to more luxurious ones. And I've heard that some of the hostels are actually quite social, making them a great option for solo travelers.
I think you're right. Mira, Seychelles has a lot to offer in terms of accommodations, whether you're looking for luxury or budget-friendly options. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the different types of accommodations available in both Lithuania and Seychelles.
Yes. And I think we've only scratched the surface of what's available in both countries. But I'm sure our listeners would agree that both Lithuania and Seychelles have a lot to offer in terms of accommodations.
Absolutely. And I think we'll have to continue this conversation another time. But for now, I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the most important factor to consider when choosing an accommodation in either country?
I think it's a tie between price and location. You want to find a place that's affordable and in a convenient location.
That's a great point, Mira. And I think we'll have to wrap up here for now. But thank you for sharing your insights on accommodation options and quality in Lithuania and Seychelles.
No problem. Leo, it's been a pleasure discussing this topic with you. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have a lot to offer in terms of accommodations.
Absolutely. And I think we'll have to continue this conversation another time. But for now, let's hear from our listeners. What do you think is the most important factor to consider when choosing an accommodation in either country?
So, let's talk about the bureaucratic journey for expats in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious to know, Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of visa procedures in these countries?
Well, Mira, I think Lithuania has a relatively straightforward process, especially for EU citizens. But for non-EU nationals, it can get a bit more complicated. Seychelles, on the other hand, has a more relaxed attitude towards tourism and immigration. But it's still essential to understand the rules.
That's true. I've heard that Lithuania has a visa-free policy for certain countries, but Seychelles has a more generous approach to tourism. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys think it's better to have a more relaxed approach, or a stricter one?
That's a great question. Mira, I think it's essential to balance both. On one hand, a more relaxed approach can make it easier for tourists to visit. But on the other hand, it's crucial to ensure that the country's resources and infrastructure can handle the influx of visitors.
Exactly. And that's where Seychelles comes in. They have a more laid-back approach. But it's still essential to follow the rules and regulations. I've heard that Seychelles has a tourist visa on arrival program, which allows visitors to obtain a visa at the airport upon arrival.
Yes. That's a great program, Mira. But I've also heard that it can be a bit tricky to navigate, especially for first-time visitors. It's essential to have all the necessary documents and to follow the correct procedures.
Absolutely. And that's where Lithuania comes in. They have a more structured approach to immigration, which can be beneficial for those who are planning to stay longer. I've heard that Lithuania has a residence permit program, which allows foreigners to live and work in the country.
That's correct. Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique challenges when it comes to immigration. For example, Lithuania has a complex process for obtaining a residence permit, while Seychelles has issues with corruption and bureaucratic red tape.
That's a great point. Leo, it's essential to be aware of these challenges and to be prepared. I've heard that Seychelles has a reputation for being one of the most corrupt countries in the world, which can make it difficult for expats to navigate the system.
Yes, that's a concern, Mira. But I think it's worth noting that Seychelles is also working to improve its reputation and to address corruption. And Lithuania has its own set of challenges, such as the complex process for obtaining a residence permit.
Exactly. And that's where our listeners come in. We want to hear from you. If you've had any experiences with immigration in Lithuania or Seychelles, please share your stories and tips with us. We'd love to hear about your experiences.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique cultural and historical contexts that can affect the immigration process. For example, some think that we can conquer that. Seychelles has a rich history of colonialism and slavery, which can impact the way that expats interact with the local population.
Yes. And that's a great point. Leo, It's essential to be aware of these cultural and historical contexts when navigating the immigration process. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique charm and attractions that can make them worth visiting.
Absolutely. Mira. And I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has some of the most beautiful beaches and coral reefs in the world, while Lithuania has a rich cultural heritage and a stunning natural landscape.
Exactly. And I think it's worth noting how their own unique festivals and celebrations that can be a great way to experience the local culture. For example, Seychelles has a vibrant music and dance scene, while Lithuania has a rich tradition of folk music and dance.
Ah, yes. And that's a great point. Mira, it's essential to experience the local culture and to participate in festivals and celebrations. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have their own unique challenges and obstacles when it comes to immigration. But with the right approach and preparation, it can be a smooth and enjoyable experience.
Absolutely, Leah. And I think it's worth noting that our listeners are probably... Okay, this is all well and good, but how do I actually navigate the immigration process? Well, we'll be discussing that in our next episode, so stay tuned.
And don't forget to leave your comments and questions below, and we'll do our best to answer them. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
So, when it comes to healthcare, Lithuania and Seychelles are quite different in terms of their systems. Lithuania has a universal healthcare system, which means that everyone has access to medical care, regardless of their income or social status. It's like a big safety net, and I think that's really great.
I agree. Mira, Lithuania's healthcare system is indeed well organized. But what about Seychelles? I've heard that they have a more limited healthcare system, and it's mostly funded by the government. I'm curious, what's the situation like in Seychelles?
Well, Leo, Seychelles does have a universal healthcare system, but it's not as comprehensive as Lithuania's. However, the good news is that Seychelles has made significant strides in recent years to improve its healthcare system. They've invested in new hospitals, and there are more medical professionals available.
That's interesting. I've also heard that Seychelles has a high life expectancy rate, which is impressive considering its small population. But what about the quality of healthcare? I've heard mixed reviews from expats living in Seychelles.
Yes, I've heard that too. Leo, while Seychelles has made progress in terms of healthcare infrastructure, there are still concerns about the quality of care. Some expats have reported long waiting times and a lack of specialized medical services. It's worth noting that Seychelles is a small island nation, and resources are limited.
I see what you mean, Mira. But what about Lithuania? How does its healthcare system compare to Seychelles? I've heard that Lithuania has a highly developed healthcare system, with a wide range of medical services available.
Exactly. Leo, Lithuania's healthcare system is indeed highly developed, with a strong emphasis on preventive care. They have a high number of medical professionals per capita, and the system is well funded. Plus, Lithuania has a strong tradition of medical research, which is a great asset.
That's impressive. I'm curious. Mira, what about the cost of healthcare in Lithuania? I've heard that it's relatively affordable compared to other European countries.
Yes, Leo, that's true. Lithuania has a relatively low cost of healthcare compared to other European countries. It's worth noting that healthcare costs can vary depending on the specific service or treatment. But overall, Lithuania's healthcare system is very affordable.
I'm glad to hear that. Mira, and what about Seychelles? How does the cost of healthcare compare to Lithuania? I've heard that Seychelles has a more expensive healthcare system.
Yes. Seychelles does have a more expensive healthcare system. Leo, the good news is that many expats living in Seychelles have health insurance that covers them for medical expenses. And for those who don't have insurance, there are still options available, such as the government-funded healthcare system.
That's reassuring to hear. Mira, I'm curious. what about the cultural nuances of healthcare in these two countries? I've heard that Lithuania has a more laid-back approach to healthcare, while Seychelles has a more formal approach.
Ah, yes. I think that's a great point. Lithuania just have a more laid-back approach to healthcare, with a focus on preventive care and community-based healthcare, while Seychelles, on the other hand, has a more formal approach, with a focus on hospital-based care.
I see what you mean. Mira, and what about patient experiences in these two countries? I've heard that Lithuania has a very patient-centered approach to healthcare.
Exactly. Leo, Lithuania's healthcare system is very patient-centered, with a strong emphasis on respect and empathy. Patients are treated with dignity and respect, and there's a strong focus on patient education.
That's wonderful to hear. Mira, and what about Seychelles? How does the patient experience compare to Lithuania?
Ah, yes. While Seychelles has made progress in terms of patient-centered care, there's still room for improvement. Some expats have reported long waiting times and a lack of communication from healthcare providers.
I see what you mean. Mira, but overall, it seems like both countries have their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to healthcare. I'm curious, what do our listeners think about this?
Ah, great question. Leo, I'm sure our listeners have a lot to say about this topic. And if you have any thoughts or experiences to share, please let us know in the comments.
That's a great idea. Mira. And finally, I'd like to ask our listeners a question. If you're an expat living in either Lithuania or Seychelles, what do you think is the most important aspect of the healthcare system in your country?
That's a great question, Leo. And I'm sure our listeners will have a lot to say about this topic. Thanks for joining us today. Everyone, all right. Let's step into the transportation infrastructure of Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious to see how they compare, especially when it comes to public transit and road quality. Leo, what's the first thing that comes to mind when about transportation in Lithuania?
Lithuania's roads are generally well maintained, especially in major cities like Vilnius and Kaunas. However, I've heard that traffic in Vilnius can get quite congested during rush hour. I bet our listeners in Lithuania can relate to this traffic chaos.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what about public transit? Do they have a reliable bus system, or is it more like a Wild West experience?
Well, Lithuania has a decent public transit system, but it's not as extensive as some other European countries. They do have a bus network, but it's not as frequent as I'd like. I've taken the bus from Vilnius to Kaunas, and it was interesting.
Interesting? What does that mean? Was it like a game of Russian roulette or something?
No, nothing like that. It was just a bit of a bumpy ride. But hey, at least I got to see the countryside, right?
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would love to see more countryside views. Speaking of which, how does Seychelles compare when it comes to transportation infrastructure?
Seychelles is a bit of a different story. They have a much more limited public transit system, and it's mostly focused on buses and taxis. However, I've heard that the roads on the islands can be quite scenic, especially when it comes to the coastal routes.
That sounds amazing. I bet the coastal views are breathtaking. But what about getting around on the islands themselves? Is it easy to rent a car, or is it more like a treasure hunt?
Well, it's not exactly a treasure hunt, but it can be a bit challenging to rent a car, especially if you're not familiar with the local roads. But they do have a decent taxi service, and you can also take buses or ferries to get around.
That makes sense. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the ferry system in Seychelles. What can you tell us about it?
The ferry system is actually quite extensive, and it's a great way to get around the islands. They have ferries that connect the main islands to the smaller ones, and it's a beautiful way to see the coastline.
That sounds incredible. I'm sure our listeners are taking notes. And I'm sure you are too. Leo.
Yeah, I am. But seriously, both Lithuania and Seychelles have their own unique transportation challenges, and it's interesting to see how they've adapted to their respective environments.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this comparison so fascinating. It's not just about the transportation infrastructure itself, but also how it affects the daily lives of people living in these countries.
Absolutely. And I think that's something our listeners can relate to, whether they're from Lithuania, Seychelles, or anywhere else in the world.
That's right. And speaking of which, what do you think is the biggest transportation challenge facing Lithuania right now?
That's a tough one. I think it's the congestion in Vilnius during rush hour. But I'm sure our listeners have some thoughts on the matter. What do you all think about this? Tell us below.
Yeah, I'm sure our listeners have some opinions, and I'm sure you do too. Leo, what's your take on the situation?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors, including the increasing population of Vilnius and the lack of a reliable public transit system. But I'm sure there are some solutions that can be implemented to alleviate the congestion.
That's a great point. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about those solutions. If you've got a better transit hack, drop a comment.
Yeah, I'm sure our listeners have some creative ideas. But in all seriousness, I think it's great that we're having this conversation and exploring the transportation challenges facing these two countries.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes this podcast so special. We're not just talking about transportation infrastructure. We're talking about the people behind it and the challenges they face.
That's right. And I think that's something our listeners can really relate to, whether they're from Lithuania, Seychelles, or anywhere else in the world.
So when it comes to language barriers, I'm curious about Lithuania. How easy is it for foreigners to communicate in everyday situations?
Well, Lithuanian is a difficult language for many people to learn, especially for those who don't have a background in Slavic languages. But in tourist areas, you'll often find people who speak some English, especially younger people and those in the service industry.
That's reassuring. I've heard that many Lithuanians speak English as a second language. But what about in more rural areas? Do people struggle to communicate there?
Yeah, in rural areas, it's more challenging to find people who speak English. However, many Lithuanians are proud of their language and culture, and they'll often try to communicate with foreigners using gestures and simple phrases.
That's a great point. And what about the language itself? How does it compare to other languages in terms of complexity?
Lithuanian is actually one of the oldest languages in the world, and it has a unique grammar system that can be quite challenging for non-native speakers. But it's also a beautiful language with a rich history and culture.
I've heard that Lithuanian is a fascinating language. Now, let's move on to Seychelles. How does the language situation compare there?
Seychelles is a great example of a country with a diverse language landscape. The official languages are Creole, French, and English. But you'll also hear many other languages spoken, including Hindi and Chinese.
Wow, that's a lot of languages. How do people manage to communicate such a multilingual environment?
Well, Seychelles has a unique cultural identity that reflects its history as a former French and British colony. Many Seychellois people speak multiple languages, including Creole, French, and English, which makes it easier for foreigners to communicate.
That's fascinating. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the language situation in Seychelles. Have you heard any interesting stories about language and communication in the islands?
Actually, I have. I once met a Seychellois person who spoke 6 different languages, including Creole, French, English, Hindi, Chinese, and even some Portuguese. It was amazing to see how easily they could switch between languages and communicate with people from different backgrounds.
Well, that's incredible. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the language learning resources available in Seychelles. Are there any language schools or programs that can help foreigners learn Creole and other local languages?
Yes. Seychelles has a few language schools that offer courses in Creole and other local languages. Some of these schools also offer cultural immersion programs that allow foreigners to learn about Seychellois culture and language in a more interactive way.
That sounds like a great resource for our listeners. And finally, I'm curious about the language learning resources available in Lithuania. Are there any language schools or programs that can help foreigners learn Lithuanian?
Actually, Lithuania has a few language schools that offer courses in Lithuanian for foreigners. Some of these schools also offer cultural immersion programs that allow foreigners to learn about Lithuanian culture and language in a more interactive way.
That's great to know. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the language learning resources available in both countries. If you're interested in learning more about language and communication in Lithuania and Seychelles, please leave a comment below or check out our links in the description.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content on language and culture from around the world.
I'm curious. Leah, what's your take on cultural diversity in Lithuania? Have you had any experiences with the locals that stand out in your mind?
Yes. Lithuania. It's a country with a rich cultural heritage, and I've had the chance to explore it a bit. From what I've seen, Lithuanians are a very proud people, and their culture is deeply rooted in their history and traditions.
That's really interesting. Leo, I've heard that Lithuania is one of the most homogeneous countries in the world, with a strong emphasis on preserving their cultural identity. But how do you think they balance this with embracing diversity and tolerance?
Well, I think it's a delicate balance, to be honest. On the one hand, Lithuanians are very welcoming and open to foreigners, especially in the bigger cities like Vilnius and Kaunas. But on the other hand, there's a strong sense of national identity that can make it challenging for outsiders to fully integrate.
I see what you mean. Trying to preserve their cultural heritage while also being open to new influences. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that it's a complex issue.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great example of how different cultures can approach diversity and tolerance in unique ways. But let's switch gears and talk about Seychelles for a moment. Have you heard about the incredible diversity of cultures in Seychelles? Mira?
Actually, I have. Seychelles is an archipelago off the coast of East Africa. And it's a melting pot of cultures from all over the world. From the indigenous as the Seychelles people to the African, European, and Asian influences. It's a fascinating cultural landscape.
Exactly. And what I find really interesting is how Seychelles has managed to balance its cultural diversity with a strong sense of national identity. It's a country that's proud of its African roots, but also celebrates its European and Asian influences.
That's so true. Leo. And I think it's a great example of how different cultures can come together to create something unique and vibrant. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Seychelles' approach to cultural diversity is something that other countries could learn from?
That's a great question, Mira. I think Seychelles' approach is definitely worth considering, especially in a world where cultural diversity is becoming increasingly important. But at the same time, I think it's also important to acknowledge the challenges that come with embracing diversity, especially in a country like Lithuania, where there's a strong sense of national identity.
I see what you mean. It's like they're trying to navigate between preserving their cultural heritage and embracing new influences. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that it's a delicate balance to strike.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great example of how different cultures can approach diversity and tolerance in unique ways. But what do you think is the key to fostering social cohesion in a country like Seychelles? Mira, how do you think they manage to balance their cultural diversity with a sense of national identity?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the key factors is the Seychelles people's emphasis on community and social harmony. They have a strong sense of shared values and traditions that brings people together, even across cultural divides.
I see what you mean. It's like they're creating a sense of shared identity that transcends cultural differences. I think that's a really important lesson for other countries to learn from.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a strong tradition of cultural exchange and cooperation, which helps to foster social cohesion and understanding.
That's a great point. Mira, I think it's also worth mentioning that Seychelles has a very strong sense of national identity, which is rooted in its history and culture. But at the same time, they're also very open to new influences and ideas.
I see what you mean. It's like they're trying to strike a balance between preserving their cultural heritage and embracing new influences. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me that it's a delicate balance to strike.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great example of how different cultures can approach diversity and tolerance in unique ways. But what do you think is the most important thing that we can learn from Seychelles' approach to cultural diversity? Mira?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important things is the emphasis on community and social harmony. It's a reminder that cultural diversity is not just about preserving our cultural heritage, but also about building bridges between different cultures and communities.
I see what you mean. It's like they're creating a sense of shared identity that transcends cultural differences. I think that's a really important lesson for other countries to learn from. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me that it's a great example of how cultural diversity can be a strength, not a weakness.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a very strong tradition of cultural exchange and cooperation, which helps to foster social cohesion and understanding. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you think Seychelles' approach to cultural diversity is something that other countries could learn from?
That's a great question. Mira, I think Seychelles' approach is definitely worth considering, especially in a world where cultural diversity is becoming increasingly important. But at the same time, I think it's also important to acknowledge the challenges that come with embracing diversity, especially in a country like Lithuania where there's a strong sense of national identity.
I see what you mean. Leo, it's like they're trying to navigate between preserving their cultural heritage and embracing new influences. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that it's a delicate balance to strike.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great example of how different cultures can approach diversity and tolerance in unique ways. But what do you think is the most important thing that we can learn from Lithuania's approach to cultural diversity? Mira?
That's a great question. Leo, I think one of the most important things is the emphasis on preserving cultural heritage and traditions. It's a reminder that cultural diversity is not just about embracing new influences, but also about preserving our cultural roots.
I see what you mean. It's like they're trying to strike a balance between preserving their cultural heritage and embracing new influences. I think that's a really important lesson for other countries to learn from.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth noting that Lithuania has a very strong tradition of cultural festivals and events, which helps to promote cultural diversity and understanding.
That's a great point.
I'm curious. Leo, have you heard about Lithuania's literacy rate? It's one of the highest in Europe, with over 99% of the population able to read and write.
Yes. That's impressive. But what's even more fascinating is how Lithuania's education system has adapted to the needs of its people. From what I've learned, they've implemented innovative teaching methods that focus on hands-on learning and project-based approaches.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Lithuania apart from other countries. Their emphasis on practical learning has led to some amazing results, like their students consistently ranking high in international math and science competitions.
That's right. And it's not just about the academics. Lithuania's education system also places a strong emphasis on character development and social skills. They believe that by teaching children how to work together and solve problems, they'll be better equipped to tackle the challenges of the real world.
I love that approach, and I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me. But what about Seychelles? How does their education system compare?
Well, Seychelles has made significant strides in improving its education system, especially in recent years. They've implemented a new curriculum that focuses on STEM education and has seen some impressive results.
That's great to hear. And I'm curious, Leah, have you heard about Seychelles' unique approach to teaching English as a second language? They use a method called total physical response, which combines movement and action with language learning.
Yes. I've heard about that. It's a fascinating approach that really gets students engaged and active. And from what I understand, it's been very effective in helping students learn English quickly and confidently.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Seychelles apart from other countries. Their innovative approach to language learning has made it easier for students to pick up English, which is essential for their tourism industry.
That's right. And it's not just about the language. Seychelles' education system also places a strong emphasis on cultural awareness and appreciation. They believe that by teaching students about their own culture and history, they'll be better equipped to appreciate and respect the cultures of others.
I love that approach, and I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But what about the challenges facing the education system in both countries? How do they address issues like funding and access to education?
Well, both countries face similar challenges, but they're addressing them in different ways. Lithuania has implemented a system of vouchers that allow parents to choose the school their child attends, which has led to an increase in competition and innovation among schools.
That's a great idea. And I'm curious. Leah, have you heard about Seychelles' approach to addressing the issue of access to education? They've implemented a program called Education for All, which provides scholarships and support to students from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Ah, yes. I've heard about that. It's a wonderful initiative that really demonstrates Seychelles' commitment to making education accessible to all.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Seychelles apart from other countries. Their commitment to education for all has made a real difference in the lives of their students.
That's right. And it's not just about the students. The education system in both countries also has a positive impact on the broader community. In Lithuania, for example, the education system has contributed to a highly skilled workforce that has helped drive economic growth.
I love that example. And I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me. But what about the future of education in both countries? How do they see education evolving in the next few years?
Well, both countries are committed to continuing to innovate and improve their education systems. In Lithuania, for example, they're exploring the use of technology to enhance learning and make it more accessible.
That's a great idea. And I'm curious. Leo, have you heard about Seychelles' plans to introduce a new curriculum that focuses on sustainability and environmental education?
Ah, yes. I've heard about that. It's a fantastic initiative that really demonstrates Seychelles' commitment to preparing its students for the challenges of the 21st century.
Exactly. And I think that's what sets Seychelles apart from other countries. Their commitment to sustainability and environmental education has made a real difference in the lives of their students.
That's right. And it's not just about the students. The education system in both countries also has a positive impact on the broader community. In Seychelles, for example, the education system has contributed to a highly skilled workforce that has helped drive economic growth.
I love that example. And I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree with me. But what about the key takeaways from our discussion today? What can our listeners take away from comparing the educational opportunities and language schools in Lithuania and Seychelles?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that both countries have a lot to offer in terms of educational opportunities and language schools. From innovative teaching methods to a strong emphasis on character development and social skills, there's something for everyone.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would agree with me. If you're living in either of these countries, I encourage you to explore the educational opportunities and language schools available to you.
That's right. And don't forget to leave a comment below and let us know what you think about our discussion today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more informative and entertaining content like this. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. So Leo, let's talk about climate and seasonal conditions in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious, have you ever experienced a real winter in Lithuania? You know, the kind where it snows and it's freezing cold.
Ah, yes, I have. And I must say, it's quite a unique experience. But, you know, I'm a bit of a coffee snob, and I find that the Lithuanian coffee culture is quite fascinating. I mean, who needs a fancy coffee shop when you can have a traditional coffee house with a fireplace?
That's true. But let's get back to the climate. Lithuania is known for its continental climate, with cold winters and mild summers. On the other hand, Seychelles has a tropical climate, with high temperatures and high humidity year-round. I'm sure our listeners living in Seychelles would agree that the heat and humidity can be quite challenging at times.
Yes, I can imagine. But, you know, I've heard that Seychelles is a great place to visit if you're looking for a tropical getaway. The beaches, the crystal clear waters. It's like a paradise on earth.
That's true. But let's not forget about the weather extremes in Seychelles. The country is prone to cyclones and tropical storms, which can be quite destructive. On the other hand, Lithuania has its own set of weather extremes, such as the intense cold snaps in winter.
Ah, yes. The cold snaps. They're quite a challenge for the locals, aren't they? But, you know, I've heard that the Lithuanians are quite resourceful when it comes to dealing with the cold. They have all sorts of clever ways to keep warm, like using traditional saunas and hot baths.
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a good sauna to warm you up on a cold winter's day. But let's talk about the seasonal changes in both countries. In Lithuania, the summer months are quite warm, with temperatures often reaching the mid-20 seconds. On the other hand, Seychelles has a more consistent temperature throughout the year, with temperatures rarely dropping below 20 degrees Celsius.
Ah, yes. The Seychelles temperature is quite consistent, isn't it? But, you know, I've heard that the country has a unique way of dealing with the heat. They use a combination of traditional and modern methods to keep cool, like using traditional shades and awnings to block out the sun.
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a good shade to keep you cool on a hot summer's day. But let's talk about the local adaptations in both countries. In Lithuania, the locals have developed all sorts of clever ways to deal with the cold, like using traditional clothing and heating systems.
Ah, yes. The Lithuanian clothing is quite something. They have all sorts of traditional garments, like the woolen coats and hats, to keep warm in the cold winter months. And, you know, I've heard that the locals have a unique way of dealing with the cold, like using traditional folk dances to keep warm.
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a good dance to keep you warm on a cold winter's day. But let's talk about the impact of climate change on both countries. Lithuania is experiencing more frequent and intense heat waves, while Seychelles is dealing with the impacts of rising sea levels.
Yes. The impacts of climate change are quite far-reaching, aren't they? But, you know, I've heard that both countries are taking steps to mitigate the effects of climate change, like using renewable energy sources and implementing sustainable practices.
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that it's essential to take action to mitigate the effects of climate change. But let's talk about the unique features of each country's climate. In Lithuania, the country has a unique microclimate, with the temperatures varying greatly depending on the region.
Ah, yes. The Lithuanian microclimate is quite something. They have all sorts of unique weather patterns, like the intense cold snaps in winter and the hot summers. And, you know, I've heard that the locals have a unique way of dealing with the microclimate, like using traditional folk remedies to keep warm.
That's true. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a good folk remedy to keep you warm on a cold winter's day. But let's wrap up our discussion on climate and seasonal conditions in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have unique and fascinating climates, with their own set of challenges and adaptations.
Ah, yes. The climates of Lithuania and Seychelles are quite something. But, you know, I'm curious, what do our listeners think about this topic? Do you have any thoughts or experiences to share about the climates of these two countries?
So, when it comes to food, culture, and nutritional alternatives in Lithuania, I'm fascinated by the country's love for local ingredients and traditional recipes. They have a saying, "Yokai is jaras," Kaiseja, which means the farm is good when it's fertile. It's all about celebrating the land and its bounty.
That's so true. And in Seychelles, I've noticed a similar emphasis on seafood and local produce. They have an incredible array of fresh fruits and vegetables, from pineapples to papayas. And let's not forget about the seafood. It's like a paradise for fish lovers.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would agree that a paradise for fish lovers is a dream come true. But seriously, both countries have a strong connection to their local food traditions. In Lithuania, you'll find dishes like cepelinai, which are potato-filled dumplings, and te ivinai, which are meat-filled pastries. They're delicious.
I'm sure our listeners are salivating just about those dishes. And in Seychelles, you'll find dishes like poisson siaryu, which is a raw fish salad, and gumbo, a hearty fish stew. The seafood is so fresh and abundant. It's like a treasure trove.
I love how both countries are passionate about their local ingredients. And it's not just about the food itself, but also about the culture and traditions that come with it. In Lithuania, for example, you'll find that many traditional dishes are served on special occasions, like holidays and weddings.
That's so true. And in Seychelles, you'll find that many traditional dishes are served at family gatherings and barbecues. It's all about sharing food and sharing love with the people around you. And speaking of love, I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a warm, freshly baked loaf of bread to bring people together.
Well, I'm sure our listeners would agree that a warm loaf of bread is always a welcome addition to any gathering. But seriously, both countries have a rich history and culture that's reflected in their food traditions. And it's not just about the food itself, but also about the way it's prepared and shared.
I think that's one of the things that makes food culture so special. It's not just about the food, but also about the people and the traditions that come with it. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a delicious, homemade meal to bring people together.
Absolutely. And I'm curious. Leo, what do you think is the most unique aspect of food culture in Seychelles?
I think it's the way they blend different cultures and cuisines to create something entirely new and unique. For example, you'll find Creole dishes like fish curries and rice dishes that are influenced by African, French, and Asian flavors.
Oh, that's so fascinating. And I think it's something that Lithuania could learn from as well. They have a rich cultural heritage, but it's not always reflected in their food traditions.
I think that's a great point. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's always room for innovation and creativity in food culture. Whether it's trying new ingredients or experimenting with new recipes, there's always something new to discover.
Well, I'm sure our listeners are inspired to try new things and explore the food cultures of both Lithuania and Seychelles. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have a culinary exchange program between the two countries.
Wouldn't that be amazing? A culinary exchange program between Lithuania and Seychelles. I think that's a great idea. Mira,
I think it's something that could bring people together and foster greater understanding and appreciation for each other's cultures. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have a food festival that celebrates the best of both worlds.
that sounds like a dream come true. A food festival that celebrates the best of Lithuania and Seychelles. It's like a match made in heaven.
Well, I think we can make that happen. Leah? And who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a cookbook that showcases the best of both countries' culinary traditions.
That's a great idea. Mira, a cookbook that celebrates the flavors and traditions of Lithuania and Seychelles. It's like a recipe for success.
Well, I think we can make that happen. Leah? And I'm sure our listeners would agree that a cookbook is always a great way to share love and tradition with the people around you.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that there's nothing like a delicious, homemade meal to bring people together.
Well, I think you'll stop it. But before we go, I'd love to hear from our listeners what do you think about the food culture and nutritional alternatives in Lithuania and Seychelles. Do you have any favorite dishes or recipes that you'd like to share?
Yes, please do share your thoughts and comments with us. We'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation on social media. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
I'm so dive into the historical, cultural, and artistic values of our two countries. Lithuania is known for its rich history, from the medieval old town of Vilnius to the Hill of Crosses, a poignant symbol of the country's struggle for independence. Have you ever been to Lithuania? Leo?
Actually, Mira, I have visited Vilnius, and it's a stunning city with a mix of Gothic, Baroque, and Renaissance architecture. The Hill of Crosses is indeed a powerful symbol. But I was to learn about the country's pagan heritage, with many ancient sites and artifacts on display.
That's fascinating. Lithuania's pagan roots are a testament to its rich cultural heritage. Now, let's move on to Seychelles, an archipelago off the coast of East Africa. I'm intrigued by the country's unique blend of African, European, and Asian influences. Have you ever been to Seychelles? Leo?
Yes, I visited Seychelles a few years ago, and it was love at first sight. The stunning beaches, crystal clear waters, and lush forests are breathtaking. But what struck me was the country's history. From the arrival of the first settlers, the Seychelles, to the influence of European colonizers and the subsequent struggle for independence.
I completely agree. Leo, Seychelles has a fascinating history, and its cultural heritage is a reflection of its diverse past. Speaking of cultural heritage, I'm reminded of the importance of preserving our history and traditions. Jetta, AI loves uncovering stories like this, and so do we.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that's what makes our podcast so special. We get to share these stories with a wider audience and inspire people to learn more about the world around them. By the way, have you heard about the Vilnius Cathedral? Mira, it's a stunning example of Gothic architecture and a must-visit attraction in Lithuania.
Yes, I've heard of it. Leo, but I'd love to hear more about Seychelles' cultural scene. What are some of the unique festivals and traditions that take place in the country?
Great question. Mira, Seychelles has a vibrant cultural scene, with many festivals and traditions that showcase the country's diverse heritage. One of the most famous festivals is the Seychelles International Carnival, which celebrates the country's African, European, and Asian influences through music, dance, and costumes.
Well, that sounds amazing! I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the Seychelles International Carnival. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. What do you think about the cultural exchange between Seychelles and other countries?
Well, I think it's wonderful to see how Seychelles is embracing its diverse heritage and sharing it with the world. And I'm sure that's something that Lithuania is also proud of, with its rich cultural heritage and history. By the way, have you seen the Vilnius University? Mira? It's a beautiful example of Baroque architecture and one of the oldest universities in Eastern Europe.
Yes, I've seen it. Leo, but I'd love to hear more about Seychelles' art scene. What are some of the unique art forms and traditions that take place in the country?
Great question. Mira, Seychelles has a thriving art scene, with many talented artists who draw inspiration from the country's diverse heritage. One of the most famous art forms is the Seychelles wood carving, which is a unique blend of African and European influences.
That's fascinating. Leo, I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about Seychelles' art scene. Jet off. AI is always to share stories like this, and we're grateful to have such a wonderful audience.
Absolutely. Mira. And I think that's what makes our podcast so special. We get to share these stories with a wider audience and inspire people to learn more about the world around them. By the way, have you heard about the Klaipėda Castle? Mira? It's a stunning example of medieval architecture and a must-visit attraction in Lithuania.
Yes, I've heard of it. Leo, but I'd love to hear more about Seychelles' natural beauty. What are some of the unique landscapes and features that take place in the country?
Great question. Mira, Seychelles has some of the most beautiful landscapes in the world, with towering granite islands, crystal clear waters, and lush forests. One of the most famous natural features is the Seychelles National Park, which is home to a wide variety of flora and fauna.
Wow, that sounds breathtaking. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about Seychelles' natural beauty. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. What do you think about the importance of preserving natural beauty?
Well, I think it's essential to preserve our natural beauty and cultural heritage for future generations. And I'm sure that's something that Lithuania is also proud of, with its rich cultural heritage and history. By the way, have you seen the Trakai Island Castle? Mira, it's a beautiful example of medieval architecture in one of the most famous castles in Lithuania.
Yes, I've seen it. Leo, but I'd love to hear more about Seychelles' history. What are some of the unique historical sites and artifacts that take place in the country?
Ah, great question. Mira, Seychelles has a rich history, with many historical sites and artifacts that showcase the country's diverse past. One of the most famous historical sites is the Baltic Island, which is home to a wide variety of historical buildings and artifacts.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about Seychelles' history. Jet off. AA is always to share stories like this, and we're grateful to have such a wonderful audience.
Absolutely. Mira, and I think that's what makes our podcast so we get to share these stories with a wider audience and inspire people to learn more about the world around them.
And so to dive into the natural beauties and landscapes of Lithuania and Seychelles, let's start with Lithuania's stunning national parks, like the Curonian Spit, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Ah, yes. The Curonian Spit is breathtaking, with its and dunes and pine forests. But have you ever tried to pronounce the name of that park? Mira? It's like a mouthful.
Oh, Leo, you're such a funny guy. But seriously, Lithuania's national parks are not to be missed. And Seychelles, on the other hand, has some of the most stunning beaches in the world, like in Saucy Argent.
Ah, I've seen pictures of that beach, and it's like a postcard come to life. But what's really interesting is how Seychelles has managed to balance its tourism industry with preserving its natural beauty. I mean, have you seen the giant tortoises roaming around the islands?
Yes, I have. And they're adorable. But I think what's really impressive about Seychelles is its coral reefs. Did you know that they're home to an incredible array of marine life, including sea turtles and manta rays?
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea. And speaking of marine life, have you heard about Lithuania's Lake Platelii? It's like a hidden gem, with its crystal clear waters and surrounding forest.
Ah, yes. Lake Platelii is beautiful. But I think what's really unique about Lithuania's natural beauty is its forests. Did you know that they cover over 30% of the country? That's a lot of trees.
Yes, that's a lot of trees. And I think what's really interesting is how Lithuania's forests are home to all sorts of wildlife, like bears and wolves.
Yes. And the country's national parks are also home to a variety of bird species, like the white-tailed eagle and the black stork.
Ah, I love birds. And Seychelles has some incredible bird species too, like the Seychelles warbler and the pink pigeon.
Ah, yes. The Seychelles warbler is a rare species, but it's also an important part of the country's ecosystem. And did you know that Seychelles is also home to a variety of endemic plants, like the coco de mer?
Yes. The coco de mer is a unique plant, and it's also a symbol of Seychelles. But I think what's really interesting is how both countries have managed to preserve their natural beauty despite the challenges they face.
Oh, yes. That's a great point. Leo. And I think what's really inspiring is how both countries are working to protect their natural resources for future generations.
Ah, I completely agree. Mira, and I think that's a great note to end on. If you're interested in learning more about the natural beauties and landscapes of Lithuania and Seychelles, please check out our show notes for more information.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more updates on our next episode. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you.
And finally, if you're planning a trip to either Lithuania or Seychelles, don't forget to pack your camera and your sense of adventure.
Oh, and don't forget to try the local cuisine, especially the Lithuanian cepelini and the Seychello's Creole dishes.
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. But seriously, both countries have delicious food to offer. And I'm sure you'll love trying the local specialties.
Oh, I'm sure I will. And speaking of food, have you tried the Lithuanian dark rye bread? It's like a taste explosion in your mouth.
Oh, Leo, you're such a bread connoisseur. But seriously, Lithuanian dark rye bread is a staple in the country, and it's definitely worth trying.
And I think what's really interesting is how both countries have managed to preserve their cultural heritage despite the challenges they face.
Yes, that's a great point, Leo. And I think what's really inspiring is how both countries are working to protect their natural resources for future generations.
I completely agree. Yura, and I think that's a great note to end on. If you're interested in learning more about the natural beauties and landscapes of Lithuania and Seychelles, please check out our show notes for more information.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more updates on our next episode. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section. We love to hear from you.
And finally, if you're planning a trip to either Lithuania or Seychelles, don't forget to pack your camera and your sense of adventure.
And don't forget to try the local cuisine, especially the Lithuanian cepelina and the Seychelles as Creole dishes.
Oh, Leo, you're such a foodie. But seriously, both countries have delicious food to offer, and I'm sure you'll love trying the local specialties.
I'm sure I will. And speaking of food, have you tried the Lithuanian dark rye bread? It's like a taste explosion in your mouth.
Oh, Leo, you're such a bread connoisseur. But seriously, Lithuanian dark rye bread is a staple in the country, and it's definitely worth trying.
And I think what's really interesting is how both countries have managed to preserve their cultural heritage despite the challenges they face.
Yes, that's a great point, Leo. And I think what's really inspiring is how both countries are working to protect their natural resources for future generations.
I completely agree. Mira, and I think that's a great note to end on. If you're interested in learning more about the natural beauties and landscapes of Lithuania and Seychelles, please check out our show notes for more information.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media for more updates on our next episode. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you.
And finally, if you're planning a trip to either Lithuania or Seychelles, don't forget to pack your camera and your sense of adventure.
And done.
I'm so to talk about sports and adventure options in Lithuania and Seychelles. Who else is with me on this thrilling journey?
I am. Although, I have to admit, I'm already imagining myself on a beach in Seychelles, sipping coconut water and soaking up the sun.
Oh, come on. Leo, you know we're here to talk about sports and adventure, not just relax on a beach.
Okay. But seriously, Lithuania has some amazing sports facilities, especially for basketball and athletics. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me.
Absolutely. And Seychelles has some incredible opportunities for water sports, like snorkeling, diving, and even surfing. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys have a favorite water sport?
I think we should talk about the unique sports that each country has to offer. In Lithuania, they have a traditional sport called cast, as it's like a mix of wrestling and gymnastics. Has anyone tried it?
Well, that sounds intense. In Seychelles, they have a sport called bocce ball. It's like a combination of bowling and bocce. I've played it before, and let me tell you, it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. I'm actually curious about the outdoor activities that Seychelles has to offer. Do you have any favorite hiking trails or scenic spots?
Oh, yes. Seychelles has some amazing hiking trails, like the Seychelles National Park. And the scenic views are just breathtaking. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments. Have you guys hiked in Seychelles?
I think we should talk about the cultural festivals that each country has to offer. In Lithuania, they have a festival called Midsummer. Each summer, it's like a big celebration of music, dance, and food. Has anyone been to it?
That sounds amazing. In Seychelles, they have a festival called Creole Festival, a celebration of Creole culture and music. I've been to it, and let me tell you, it's an experience you won't forget.
I'm so jealous. I need to add Seychelles to my bucket list now. But seriously, Lithuania has some amazing cultural festivals too. We should talk about them more.
Absolutely. And speaking of festivals, I'm sure our listeners would love to know about the unique traditions that each country has to offer. In Lithuania, they have a tradition called KIBNA. It's like a special kind of meat pie that's only eaten on certain occasions. Has anyone tried it?
Well, that sounds delicious. In Seychelles, they have a tradition called Creole cuisine. It's like a mix of African, European, and Asian flavors. I've had it before, and let me tell you, it's amazing.
I'm so glad you're enjoying this conversation, Leo, and I'm sure our listeners are too. If you have any favorite sports or adventure activities in either country, please let us know in the comments.
I think we should wrap up this conversation by talking about the overall vibe of each country. In Lithuania, they have a saying Z, i.e. it means winter, but it's also a symbol of resilience and strength. What do you think about that? Mira?
I love it. In Seychelles, they have a saying Joie vivre. It means the joy of living, and it's a symbol of their laid-back and carefree attitude. I think that's something we can all learn from.
I completely agree. And that's a wrap on our conversation about sports and adventure options in Lithuania and Seychelles. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like to discuss, please let us know in the comments. So, let's talk about Lithuania's nightlife. I'm sure many of you have heard of the infamous Vilnius Old Town, with its narrow streets and cozy bars.
Ah, yes. Vilnius Old Town is a must-visit destination for any party-goer. The streets are lined with bars, clubs, and restaurants, making it the perfect spot to experience Lithuania's vibrant nightlife.
That's right. And I'm sure many of you have tried the traditional Lithuanian beer, SVY Turijas, while enjoying the lively atmosphere.
I have. And let me tell you, it's a great way to wash down the delicious Lithuanian cuisine. But have you heard about the Seychelles Festival in Lithuania?
Oh, yes. I've heard of it. And I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about it. Do any of you have experience with jazz festivals in Lithuania?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity to experience Lithuania's rich cultural heritage. But I'm not sure if it's the best representation of the country's nightlife.
Fair enough. But I think it's worth exploring. And speaking of exploring, have you heard about the vibrant nightlife scene in Seychelles?
Ah, yes. Seychelles is known for its stunning beaches and crystal clear waters. But I'm not sure if it's the best spot for a party animal like me.
Well, I think you might be. Seychelles has a great selection of bars and clubs, especially in the capital city of Victoria.
Really? I didn't know that. And what about the events and festivals in Seychelles? Are they worth checking out?
Absolutely. Seychelles has a rich cultural heritage, and the events and festivals are a great way to experience it. For example, the Seychelles International Carnival is a fantastic celebration of music, dance, and culture.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters are the perfect backdrop for a party.
Exactly. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that Seychelles has a unique and vibrant nightlife scene.
I think you might be right, Mira. But let's not forget about Lithuania's vibrant cultural scene. Have you heard about the Vilnius Festival, which showcases the country's rich cultural heritage?
Ah, yes. I've heard of it. And I think it's a great way to experience Lithuania's cultural side. But I'm curious. Leo, what do you think about the contrast between Lithuania's old town and Seychelles' vibrant nightlife scene?
Well, I think it's interesting to see how the countries with such different cultures and histories can both offer a unique and exciting nightlife experience.
Exactly. And I think our listeners would agree that both Lithuania and Seychelles have a lot to offer when it comes to nightlife and entertainment.
I think you're right. Mira, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll have a party in both Vilnius and Victoria.
Well, that would be a party to remember. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear about any other recommendations or experiences they have with nightlife and entertainment in Lithuania and Seychelles.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. But I'm sure there's always more to explore. And speaking of exploring, have any of our listeners tried the local nightlife in Seychelles?
Yes, please share your experiences. We'd love to hear about them.
Well, I think I'll have to take your advice. Mira, and explore the nightlife in Seychelles. But I'm sure it'll be a unique and unforgettable experience.
That's the spirit. Leo. And I'm sure our listeners will agree that both Lithuania and Seychelles have a lot to offer when it comes to nightlife and entertainment.
Well, I think we've reached the end of this criterion, but I'm sure there's always more to explore. And speaking of exploring, I'm curious. Mira, what do you think is the most unique aspect of Seychelles' nightlife scene?
That's a great question. Leo, I think it's the combination of the island's stunning natural beauty and the vibrant cultural scene.
Wow, that sounds amazing! And I'm sure our listeners would agree that Seychelles has a unique and unforgettable nightlife experience.
Exactly. And I think we've covered a lot of ground in this criterion. But I'm sure there's always more to explore.
Well, I think we've had a great conversation. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners will agree that both Lithuania and Seychelles have a lot to offer when it comes to nightlife and entertainment.
Well, that's all for this criterion. Folks, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one. I'm curious, have you ever been to a park in Lithuania that's been completely overrun by children on a sunny day? It's like a sea of tiny humans running around, playing tag and laughing together. I think it's amazing how Lithuanians prioritize family time.
Yes, I can picture that. In fact, I've been to some of those parks. And it's like a big family reunion. But what's interesting is that Lithuania has a lot of outdoor spaces designed specifically for kids, like the Vilnius Botanical Garden, which has a special children's section with play areas and educational activities.
That sounds amazing. And I've heard that Lithuania has a strong focus on early childhood education, with programs like the Pilotis initiative, which provides support for young families and helps them develop essential skills. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's fantastic that Lithuania is investing in its young people. And speaking of young people, have you noticed that the beaches in Seychelles are often filled with families and kids having the time of their lives? I mean, it's like a tropical paradise for families.
Oh, I love that image. And you're right. Seychelles is known for its beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters. But what's interesting is that the Seychelles government has implemented programs like the Seychelles Family Support Program to help families in need and promote family stability.
That's really great to hear. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong cultural emphasis on family and community. In Lithuania, for example, family ties are very important, and many people live in close-knit communities where everyone looks out for each other.
That's so true. And in Seychelles, I've heard that the Creole culture is all about community and family. The Creole people have a strong tradition of passing down stories and songs from generation to generation, which is really beautiful.
Ah, yes. The Creole culture is fascinating. And I think it's great that both countries are working to preserve their cultural heritage and pass it down to future generations. Maybe we can even learn a thing or two from their approaches to family and community.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on environmental education, which is essential for kids to learn about sustainability and conservation. In Lithuania, for example, there are many programs that teach kids about the importance of protecting the environment.
That's really great to hear. And I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has made significant strides in protecting its marine environment, with initiatives like the Seychelles Marine Conservation Program to preserve the country's coral reefs and marine life.
Oh, That's so cool. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a lot of outdoor activities and sports that kids can enjoy, like hiking and cycling in Lithuania, or snorkeling and diving in Seychelles.
Yes. I think we can all agree that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to outdoor adventures. But what's really important is that families feel supported and empowered to spend quality time together, whether that's through outdoor activities or just spending time at home.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on supporting families through various programs and initiatives, like the Lithuania Family Support Program or the Seychelles Family Support Program.
Yeah, it's great to see that both countries are working to support families in meaningful ways. And I think it's worth noting that the best way to support families is to provide them with opportunities to spend quality time together, whether that's through outdoor activities or just relaxing at home.
Well said, Leo. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to family-friendly activities and attractions. In Lithuania, for example, there are many museums and cultural centers that cater specifically to families with young children.
Ah, yes. I think we can all agree that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to family-friendly activities and attractions. And maybe, just maybe, our listeners living in these countries can share some of their favorite family-friendly spots and activities with us in the comments below.
Oh, that's a great idea. Leo! And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on supporting families through various programs and initiatives. Maybe we can even learn a thing or two from their approaches to family and community.
Yeah, it's always great to learn from others and share our own experiences. And I think it's worth noting that the best way to support families is to provide them with opportunities to spend quality time together, whether that's through outdoor activities or just relaxing at home.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a lot to offer when it comes to family-friendly activities and attractions. Maybe we can even plan a family-friendly trip to one of these countries and share our adventures with our listeners.
That sounds like a great idea. Yeah, and I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on supporting families through various programs and initiatives. Maybe we can even learn a thing or two from their approaches to family and community.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about that. Leo. And I think it's worth mentioning that both countries have a strong focus on environmental education, which is essential for kids to learn about sustainability and conservation.
Yeah, it's really great to see that both countries are working to preserve their cultural heritage and pass it down to future generations. And maybe, just maybe, our listeners can share some of their favorite family-friendly spots and activities with us in the comments below.
So, when it comes to LGBT-friendly atmospheres, I think Lithuania has made some impressive strides. They've got a strong community, with pride events and awareness campaigns that really bring people together.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that the Vilnius Pride Parade is actually one of the largest in Eastern Europe. But what's really interesting is how Lithuania's history has influenced its current stance on LGBT rights. They've had a pretty tumultuous past, but now they're really embracing inclusivity.
Exactly. And I think that's really reflected in the country's laws and policies. They've got anti-discrimination protections in place, and they're actively working to improve the lives of LGBT individuals.
That's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree that it's a great place to be an LGBT individual. But what about Seychelles? How does it compare?
Oh, Seychelles is actually a really interesting case. They've got a relatively small LGBT community, but they're really making strides in terms of awareness and acceptance. And I think that's partly due to the country's tourism industry. They're really trying to appeal to a diverse range of visitors.
That makes sense. And I'm curious, what do you think about the idea of a gay-friendly tourism industry? Shouldn't it just be a normal part of the industry, rather than something that needs to be marketed specifically?
I totally agree with you, Leo. And I think that's something that Seychelles is starting to get right. They're not just marketing to LGBT tourists, but they're also actively working to create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about Seychelles' efforts to create a more LGBT-friendly atmosphere.
So, let's talk a bit more about Seychelles' Pride event. They're not as big as some of the other pride parades around the world, but they're still really important for the local LGBT community.
Yeah. I've heard that the Seychelles Pride Parade is actually a really family-friendly event. They've got a lot of community involvement. And it's a great way for people to come together and celebrate their identities.
Exactly. And I think that's really reflective of the country's values as a whole. They're all about community and inclusivity, and they're really working to create a welcoming environment for everyone.
That's wonderful. And I'm curious, what do you think about the idea of creating more LGBT-friendly spaces in Seychelles? Should we be pushing for more pride events and awareness campaigns?
I think that's a great idea. And I think that's something that both Lithuania and Seychelles can learn from each other. Lithuania's got a strong community and a lot of experience with pride events, while Seychelles is still building its LGBT community.
That's a great point. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the challenges and successes of creating LGBT-friendly spaces in these two countries.
So, let's talk a bit more about the challenges of creating LGBT-friendly spaces in Seychelles. They've got a lot of work to do in terms of education and awareness, but they're also facing some real challenges in terms of funding and resources.
Yeah. I've heard that funding is a major issue for many LGBT organizations around the world. But what's really inspiring is the way that the Seychelles community is coming together to support each other and create change.
Exactly. And I think that's something that we can all learn from. We don't need a lot of resources or funding to make a difference. We just need to be willing to work together and support each other.
That's a great message. Mira, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the ways in which they can get involved and support LGBT communities in Seychelles and Lithuania.
So, let's talk a bit more about ways that our listeners can get involved. We've got a lot of resources and information on our website, and we're also working on a new project to support LGBT communities in both countries.
Oh, that sounds amazing. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the project and how they can get involved.
So, let's give our listeners a quick rundown of the project and how they can get involved. We're working with a team of local LGBT organizations to create a new community center in Seychelles. And we're also developing a range of resources and training programs to support LGBT individuals in both countries.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about the ways in which they can get involved and support this project.
So, if you're interested in learning more about the project and how you can get involved, please check out our website and social media channels. We'd love to hear from you and get your input on how we can make a difference.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and ideas with us in the comments below. We're always looking for new ways to support LGBT communities and create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
That's right, Leah. And I think that's a great way to wrap up our conversation today. Thanks for joining me and sharing your insights on LGBT-friendly atmospheres in Lithuania and Seychelles.
No problem. Mira, it's been a pleasure as always. And I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these two countries and the amazing work being done to create a more inclusive environment for everyone.
So, let's talk about Lithuania's hospitality. I've heard it's quite warm and welcoming, especially in the bigger cities like Vilnius and Kaunas.
Yes. The Lithuanians are known for their open hearts and friendly.
Exactly. I've had friends who visited and said they felt like they were part of the family.
That's great to hear. I've had a similar experience in Lithuania. The people there are so eager to help and show you around.
And it's not just the big cities. Even in the smaller towns, people are very friendly and willing to chat.
Absolutely. I remember one time. I was lost in a small village and a local took the time to show me the way back to my hotel.
Wow, that's so kind of them. I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that the hospitality is top-notch.
I'm sure they would. And I think it's interesting to note that Lithuania has a strong tradition of community and family ties, which contributes to their welcoming nature.
That's a great point. Leah, I've noticed that in many Eastern European countries, there's a strong sense of community and family.
Yes, and it's something that's really valued in Lithuanian culture.
So, let's compare this to Seychelles. What's the attitude like towards foreigners there?
Seychelles is a bit different. Mira, while the Seychelles are generally friendly, I think there's a bit more of a formal approach to interacting with foreigners.
That's interesting. I've heard that Seychelles has a strong Creole culture, which is influenced by African, European, and Asian traditions.
Yes, that's right. And I think that diversity has contributed to a more formal and polite approach to interacting with outsiders.
I see what you mean. In Seychelles, I've heard that it's customary to use formal titles and last names when addressing someone, whereas in Lithuania, it's more common to use first names.
Exactly. And I think that's a reflection of the different cultural values and norms in each country.
That's a great point. Leo, I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a more touristy vibe, which can sometimes make it feel a bit more commercialized.
Yes, that's true. But I think that's also a reflection of the country's history and economic development.
I'm curious, have our listeners ever had any experiences with the hospitality in Seychelles?
Actually, I think some of our listeners might be interested in this. If you visited Seychelles or lived there, please let us know in the comments about your experiences with the local hospitality.
And if you have any tips or advice for our listeners who are planning to visit Seychelles, please share them with us too.
Great idea, Mira. And let's talk more about the differences between Lithuanian and Seychelles hospitality.
Yes. I think one of the main differences is the level of formality. In Lithuania, it's more common to use first names and be more informal, whereas in Seychelles, it's more formal and polite.
That's right. And I think that's also reflected in the way that locals interact with each other. In Lithuania, people are more likely to greet each other with a hug or a kiss, whereas in Seychelles, it's more common to use a formal handshake or kiss on the cheek.
That's a great observation. Leo, I think it's also worth noting that Seychelles has a more diverse population, with people from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds.
Yes, that's true. And I think that diversity has contributed to a more complex and nuanced approach to hospitality.
I see what you mean. In Lithuania, the hospitality is more homogeneous, whereas in Seychelles, it's more diverse and influenced by different cultural traditions.
Exactly. And I think that something that's really worth appreciating and learning from.
Absolutely. And finally, let's talk about what our listeners can do to make the most of their experiences in Lithuania and Seychelles.
Great idea. Mira, one thing I would suggest is to learn a few basic phrases in the local language.
That's a great tip, Leo. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong tradition of community and family ties, which can be really helpful when interacting with locals.
Yes, that's true. And I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of national pride and identity, which can sometimes make it difficult for foreigners to integrate.
That's a good point, Leo. But I think it's also worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of hospitality and welcoming nature, which can make it easier for foreigners to feel at home. So, when it comes to internet infrastructure, I'm curious about how Lithuania compares to Seychelles. Leo, have you ever tried to find reliable Wi-Fi in a beach hut?
Actually, I have. And it's a miracle if you can find a signal that doesn't drop every 5 minutes. But I digress. Lithuania has a well-developed internet infrastructure, with high-speed connections available throughout the country.
That's true. But have you seen the prices for internet plans in Lithuania? They're quite high, especially for rural areas. I'm sure our listeners would agree that affordable internet is essential for modern living.
Yes. Prices can be a challenge. But Seychelles is working hard to improve its internet infrastructure, with initiatives like the Seychelles Fiber Optic Project. This will bring faster and more reliable internet to the entire archipelago.
I've heard that Seychelles is investing heavily in digital infrastructure, and it's paying off. But what about the issue of internet censorship? I know that Lithuania has strict laws regulating online content.
Actually, Seychelles has a more relaxed approach to internet censorship, which can be both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it allows for more freedom of expression, but on the other hand, it can also lead to the spread of misinformation.
That's an interesting point. Leo. And speaking of freedom of expression, I'm curious about how social media is used in Seychelles. Do you think it's a powerful tool for citizens to express their opinions and engage with their government?
Absolutely. Social media has been a game changer in Seychelles, allowing citizens to connect with each other and with their government in ways that were previously impossible. And it's not just about politics. Social media has also become a key platform for businesses and entrepreneurs to promote their products and services.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the digital nomad scene in Seychelles. What's it like to live and work remotely in this beautiful island nation?
It's a dream come true. Mira, Seychelles has a growing community of digital nomads, and the island offers a unique blend of tropical paradise and modern amenities. From co-working spaces to beachside cafes, there's no shortage of options for remote workers.
I can imagine. And what about Lithuania? What's the digital nomad scene like there? I know that Vilnius has become a popular destination for remote workers.
Yes, Vilnius is a hub for digital nomads, with a thriving community of entrepreneurs and freelancers. The city offers a great quality of life, with affordable housing and a vibrant cultural scene.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the tech industry in Lithuania. What's the current state of the sector? And what opportunities are there for startups and entrepreneurs?
Lithuania has a thriving tech industry, with a focus on areas like software development, e-commerce, and fintech. The country has a number of successful startups, and there are many opportunities for entrepreneurs to launch and grow their businesses.
That's excellent. And finally, let's talk about the future of internet infrastructure in both countries. What do you think the key challenges and opportunities are? And how can we ensure that both Lithuania and Seychelles continue to thrive in the digital age?
Well, Mira, I think the key challenge is to balance the need for fast and reliable internet with the need for affordable and accessible internet for all citizens. And I'm sure our listeners will agree that this is a challenge that requires a collaborative effort from governments, businesses, and civil society.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you for sharing your insights on internet infrastructure and digital facilities in Lithuania and Seychelles.
The pleasure is mine, Mira. And to our listeners, I'm sure you'll agree that this has been a fascinating conversation. If you have any thoughts or comments, please let us know in the comments section below.
Shopping in Lithuania is a treasure hunt. With its vibrant markets, quirky boutiques, and sprawling malls, you can find unique souvenirs, traditional handicrafts, and even second-hand treasures.
I agree. But let's not forget about the value for money aspect. Lithuania has a great balance of affordable prices and quality goods. You can snag a great deal on a designer item or a handmade craft.
That's true. But I think the real fun lies in exploring the local markets, like the one in Kaunas. You can haggle with vendors and find some amazing bargains on traditional goods like amber jewelry or woolen blankets.
But have you considered the prices of these goods? I think you'll find that Seychelles, with its African and Asian influences, has a unique shopping experience that's worth exploring. The islands offer a fascinating blend of local markets, boutiques, and luxury shopping centers.
I'm curious. What kind of luxury shopping centers are we talking about? Are they on par with what you'd find in Europe or the US?
Actually, Seychelles has some amazing high-end boutiques, like the ones in Victoria, the capital city. You can find designer brands and exclusive local fashion labels that showcase the island's unique style.
That sounds impressive, but I'm sure our listeners are. What about the prices? Can we really afford to shop like that in Seychelles? Let's not forget that the islands have a reputation for being expensive, especially when it comes to luxury goods.
True, but I think the prices are worth it for the unique experience and the quality of the goods. Plus, you can always find more affordable options at the local markets or in the smaller towns. It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. And speaking of balance, I think it's worth noting that Lithuania has some amazing shopping districts, like the one in Vilnius. you can find a mix of high-end boutiques, local designers, and affordable streetwear.
That's true. But I think Seychelles is something that Lithuania does in a more relaxed, tropical atmosphere that's perfect for shopping. You can stroll through the markets, enjoy the local cuisine, and soak up the island vibes.
I see what you mean, but I think Lithuania has its own unique charm when it comes to shopping. The country has a rich history and culture that's reflected in its markets and boutiques. Plus, the prices are generally more affordable than in Seychelles.
I agree, but I think Seychelles has some amazing opportunities for shopping on a budget. You can find great deals on local handicrafts, secondhand goods, and even some affordable luxury items. It's all about knowing where to look and when to haggle.
That's a great point. Leo, I think our listeners would appreciate some insider tips on how to shop like a local in Seychelles. Can you share some of your favorite shopping spots or tips?
Actually, I was of sharing some of my favorite shopping spots in Seychelles, but I think I'll save that for another time. For now, it's down. Let's just say that our listeners should definitely check out the local markets and boutiques in Victoria and the surrounding islands.
Sounds like a plan. Leo, I think we've given our listeners a good idea of what to expect when shopping in Lithuania and Seychelles. But before we move on, I'd love to hear from our listeners. What are your favorite shopping spots or tips for shopping in these countries?
I'm sure our listeners will have some great suggestions. Maybe we can even feature some of their favorite shopping spots in a future episode.
Sounds like a great idea. Leo, and finally, let's recap what we've discussed so far. Lithuania offers a unique shopping experience with its vibrant markets, quirky boutiques, and affordable prices. Seychelles, on the other hand, offers a more relaxed, tropical atmosphere with a mix of high-end boutiques and affordable local markets.
That's right, Mira. And I think our listeners will appreciate the insider tips and recommendations we've shared today. Thanks for joining us on this shopping adventure. And don't forget to check out our next episode for more exciting topics and discussions.
And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button if you enjoyed this episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments below.
And if you're planning a trip to Lithuania or Seychelles, be sure to check out our next episode for more insider tips and recommendations on where to shop and what to buy.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Until next time, stay shopping savvy and keep on exploring. I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me when I say that festivals and cultural events play a significant role in bringing people together. Let's talk about some of the most exciting events in Lithuania, like the Vilnius Festival, which celebrates classical music, or the Jazz Festival, which showcases the best of jazz music from around the world.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the vibrant music scene in Seychelles as well. Did you know that Seychelles has its own unique Creole music style, which combines African, European, and Asian influences? It's a fascinating blend of cultures, and I'm sure our listeners would love to experience it for themselves.
That's a great point, Leo. And speaking of cultural blends, Lithuania has a rich history of cultural exchange, which is reflected in its festivals and events. For example, the Vilnius Festival not only features classical music, but also includes performances by international artists, making it a true melting pot of cultures.
I completely agree. Mira, and Seychelles is no exception, with its own unique cultural heritage. The Seychelles International Carnival, for instance, is a vibrant celebration of music, dance, and costumes, which attracts visitors from all over the world. It's a true celebration of the country's Creole culture.
And I almost forgot to mention the UNESCO recognized site of the Hill of Crosses in Lithuania. It's a truly unique and breathtaking experience, with thousands of crosses and statues covering the hill. And did you know that this site has become a symbol of hope and resilience for the people of Lithuania?
Wow, that's incredible. Mira, and speaking of resilience, Seychelles has its own unique story to tell. The country has a rich history of adapting to different cultures and influences, which is reflected in its music, dance, and art. and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the country's unique Creole cuisine, which combines African, European, and Asian flavors.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me when I say that food is a big part of any cultural celebration. In Lithuania, for example, traditional dishes like zeppelins and kibna are oft unserved at festivals and events. And did you know that these dishes have their own unique stories and histories?
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these stories. Mira, and speaking of stories, Seychelles has its own unique tales to tell. The country's Creole culture is steeped in history and tradition, with stories of pirates, traders, and sailors who came to the island centuries ago.
Oh, and I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about these stories. And speaking of stories, I have to say that I'm a big fan of traditional folk music in Lithuania. The country has a rich history of folk music, with songs that date back centuries. And did you know that these songs often tell stories of love, war, and everyday life?
Wow, that's fascinating. Mira, and speaking of everyday life, Seychelles has its own unique take on modern music. The country's Creole culture has influenced a wide range of musical styles, from reggae to hip-hop. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the country's vibrant music scene.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me when I say that music is a universal language that brings people together. And speaking of languages, Lithuania has 3 official languages: Lithuanian and Russian. It's a truly unique cultural experience, and one that our listeners would love to learn more about.
I'm sure our listeners would love to learn more about the languages of Seychelles as well. Mira, the country has a unique Creole language that combines African, European, and Asian influences. And did you know that this language is spoken by over 90% of the population?
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the language and culture of Seychelles. And speaking of languages, I have to say that I'm a big fan of language learning. In fact, I'm currently learning Lithuanian, and I have to say that it's a challenging but rewarding language to learn.
Wow, that's impressive. Mira, and speaking of language learning, Seychelles has its own unique approach to language education. The country's Creole language is taught in schools, and it's a vital part of the country's cultural heritage. And did you know that Seychelles has a unique system of education that combines traditional and modern methods?
Oh, yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the education system in Seychelles. And speaking of education, I have to say that I'm a big fan of cultural exchange programs. In fact, I'm currently working on a project to bring students from different countries together to learn about each other's cultures.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about this project. Mira, and speaking of cultural exchange, Seychelles has its own unique approach to cultural exchange. The country has a rich history of hosting international cultural events, which brings people together from all over the world.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me when I say that cultural events and festivals are a vital part of any country's cultural heritage. And speaking of heritage, Lithuania has a rich history of cultural preservation. The country has many museums and cultural institutions that preserve its cultural heritage.
Wow, that's incredible. Mira, and speaking of preservation, Seychelles has its own unique approach to cultural preservation. The country has a rich history of preserving its natural and cultural heritage, with many national parks and wildlife reserves that protect its unique ecosystem.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the natural beauty of Seychelles. The country has a stunning coastline, with crystal clear waters and coral reefs that are home to a wide range of marine life.
I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the marine life of Seychelles. Mira, and speaking of marine life, Lithuania has its own unique take on marine conservation. The country has many national parks and protected areas that preserve its marine ecosystem.
Yes. And I'm sure our listeners would agree with me when I say that marine conservation is a vital part of any country's environmental heritage. And speaking of heritage, I have to say that I'm a big fan of cultural festivals. In fact, I'm currently working on a project to bring together different cultural festivals from around the world.
Wow, that's fascinating. Mira, and speaking of festivals, Seychelles has its own unique take on cultural festivals. The country has many festivals throughout the year, which celebrate its unique Creole culture.
Ah, yes. And I'm sure our listeners dive into the opportunities and ease of learning the local language in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm to share my experience and insights with you.
I'm curious to know, Mira, how do you think the language learning process differs between these two countries? Do you think Lithuanians are more welcoming to foreign learners?
Actually, Leo, I think both countries have their own unique approaches to language education. In Lithuania, I noticed that language schools and private tutors are quite common, especially in larger cities like Vilnius and Kaunas.
Ah, yes. I've heard that Lithuania has a well-established language teaching industry. But what about Seychelles? How do they approach language learning?
Well, Leo, Seychelles has a more relaxed atmosphere, and I think that's reflected in their approach to language education. They have a more informal, conversational style, which I find really helpful for learners.
That's interesting. I've heard that Seychelles has a strong focus on Creole language, which is a unique blend of Afrikaan, European, and Asian influences. How do you think that affects the learning process?
Yes, the Creole language is definitely a distinctive feature of Seychelles. I think it's great that they're embracing their cultural heritage and making it accessible to learners.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that Lithuania could learn from. But what about the challenges of learning the local language in each country? Are there any common pitfalls that learners should be aware of?
Yes, definitely. In Lithuania, I found that the grammar and pronunciation can be quite challenging for non-native speakers. But in Seychelles, I think the biggest challenge is the sheer variety of languages spoken: Creole, English, and many others.
That's a great point, Mia. And I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has a more diverse population, which can make language learning more complex. But what about language learning resources? Are there any online platforms or apps that can help learners in each country?
Actually, Leo, I think both countries have some excellent online resources. In Lithuania, I found that language exchange websites like iTalki and Conversation Exchange are really popular among learners.
That's great to know. And in Seychelles, I've heard that there are some excellent language learning apps like Duolingo and Babel that cater to the local language and culture.
Exactly. And I think that's really helpful for learners who want to immerse themselves in the local language and culture.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong focus on language and culture. In Lithuania, I found that language and culture are deeply intertwined, and learners are encouraged to learn about the country's history and customs.
That's so true, Leo. And in Seychelles, I think the emphasis on language and culture is even more pronounced. They have a strong tradition of storytelling and oral culture, which is really fascinating to learn about.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think it's worth noting that both countries have a strong sense of community and welcome foreigners with open arms.
I completely agree, Leo. And I think that's something that our listeners should take away from this conversation, that language learning is not just about mastering the new language, but also about immersing oneself in the local culture and community.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for sharing your insights and experiences, Nira.
Thank you, Leo. I'm glad we could have this conversation and share our perspectives on language learning in Lithuania and Seychelles.
And to our listeners, I'm curious to know, have you had any experiences with language learning in either of these countries? Share your stories and tips in the comments below.
And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more conversations like this one. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
And finally, if you're planning a trip to either Lithuania or Seychelles, don't forget to learn a few basic phrases in the local language. It will make a big difference in your experience.
When it comes to safety and comfort for women travelers, Lithuania and Seychelles offer distinct experiences. In Lithuania, I've noticed a strong emphasis on personal space and respect for women. For instance, if you're walking alone at night, it's not uncommon to see men holding doors open for you or offering their seat on public transportation.
That's great to hear. Mira, I've had similar experiences in Lithuania, but I think Seychelles takes it to a whole new level. The island nation has a reputation for being one of the safest destinations for women travelers, with a strong focus on community and family values. Seychelles' culture is inherently welcoming to women.
I agree. Leo, in Seychelles, I felt incredibly comfortable exploring the islands, even at night. The locals were always friendly and helpful, and I appreciated the emphasis on women's rights and empowerment. Did you notice any specific initiatives or programs that promote women's safety and comfort in Seychelles?
Actually, Mira, I was impressed by the Seychelles government's commitment to addressing domestic violence and promoting gender equality. They've implemented various programs and services to support women and children affected by violence, and it's heartening to see the community coming together to address these issues.
That's fantastic to hear. Leo, in Lithuania, I've noticed that women's rights and empowerment are also important issues. I think the country could learn from Seychelles' approach to addressing domestic violence and promoting community involvement. Have you noticed any differences in how women are perceived or treated in Lithuania versus Seychelles?
Well, Mira, I think one significant difference is the level of machismo culture in Lithuania. While it's not unique to Lithuania, I've noticed that some men in Lithuania can be quite chauvinistic or dismissive of women's concerns. In contrast, Seychelles has a more relaxed and laid-back attitude, which I think contributes to a safer and more comfortable environment for women.
That's a great point. Leo, I've also noticed that Seychelles has a strong focus on tourism, and women are often encouraged to participate in and contribute to the local economy. In Lithuania, I've seen more of a focus on industry and technology, which can sometimes lead to a more masculine-dominated environment. Do you think this is related to the country's cultural or historical context?
That's an interesting question. Vera, I think it's possible that Lithuania's historical context and cultural heritage have contributed to a more masculine-dominated society. However, Seychelles' history as a British and French colony has likely had a more significant impact on its cultural and social development. Perhaps this has contributed to the island nation's more relaxed and welcoming attitude towards women.
I see what you mean. Leo, it's fascinating to explore the historical and cultural context of each country and how it affects the safety and comfort of women travelers. If you were to recommend a destination for women travelers, would you choose Lithuania or Seychelles?
That's a tough question. Mira, while both countries have their strengths and weaknesses, I think Seychelles would be my top choice. The island nation offers a unique blend of safety, comfort, and community, making it an ideal destination for women travelers. Plus, the beaches are stunning.
I can see why you'd choose Seychelles. Leo, but what about Lithuania? Don't you think it's a great destination for women travelers as well?
Absolutely. Mira, Lithuania has a lot to offer, and I think it's a great choice for women travelers who want to experience a more urban and cosmopolitan environment. However, if I'm being honest, Seychelles just has a certain genie says quo that makes it stand out.
I think I see what you mean. Leo, well, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about this topic. Have you, our listeners, had any experiences or opinions about safety and comfort for women travelers in Lithuania or Seychelles? Please share your thoughts in the comments below.
I think our listeners will have some great insights to share. Mira, and who knows, maybe we'll even get some recommendations for our next podcast episode.
Dive into the world of legal systems and individual rights in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious, Leo, have you ever had to deal with any quirky laws in Lithuania?
Well, I once had to navigate the infamous law on the protection of public order and the prevention of crime, which seems to be a bit of a mouthful, don't you think? But seriously, Lithuania has made significant strides in protecting individual rights and freedoms.
That's great to hear. Leo? And speaking of individual rights, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the concept of human dignity in Lithuania's legal system. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes? Human dignity is a fundamental right in Lithuania, and it's closely tied to the concept of personal autonomy. In fact, the country's constitution explicitly states that every person has the right to respect for their dignity.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I'm sure our listeners would be curious to know how this plays out in everyday life. Can you give us an example of how human dignity is protected in practice?
Well, for instance, Lithuania has strict laws against hate speech and discrimination. If someone is found guilty of hate speech, they can face severe penalties, including fines and even imprisonment.
That's a great example. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the role of the judiciary in upholding individual rights. Can you tell us a bit more about the Lithuanian judiciary?
Yes. The Lithuanian judiciary is considered to be one of the most independent and impartial in the region. The country's constitution guarantees the independence of the judiciary, and the judges are selected through a rigorous process to ensure their impartiality.
That's reassuring to know. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the relationship between the government and the judiciary in Lithuania. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, Lithuania has a system of checks and balances in place to prevent the government from overstepping its powers. The judiciary is empowered to review government actions and ensure that they are in line with the Constitution.
That's a great system. Leo? And I'm sure our listeners would be curious to know more about how this plays out in Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about the legal system in Seychelles?
Yes. Seychelles has a unique legal system that is based on the principles of English common law. The country's constitution guarantees individual rights and freedoms, including the right to a fair trial and the right to protection from arbitrary detention.
That's great to hear. Leo? And I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the role of the judiciary in Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about the Seychelles judiciary?
Yes. The Seychelles judiciary is considered to be one of the most independent and impartial in the region. The country's constitution guarantees the independence of the judiciary, and the judges are selected through a rigorous process to ensure their impartiality.
That's reassuring to know. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the relationship between the government and the judiciary in Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, Seychelles has a system of checks and balances in place to prevent the government from overstepping its powers. The judiciary is empowered to review government actions and ensure that they are in line with the Constitution.
That's a great system. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the challenges facing the legal systems in both Lithuania and Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. Both countries face challenges in ensuring that their legal systems are effective and accessible to all citizens. However, I think it's worth noting that Seychelles has made significant strides in improving access to justice, particularly for marginalized communities.
That's great to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the role of civil society in promoting individual rights and freedoms in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. Civil society plays a vital role in promoting individual rights and freedoms in both Lithuania and Seychelles. In Lithuania, civil society organizations have been instrumental in pushing for reforms to the country's laws and policies.
That's fantastic to hear. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the impact of international human rights standards on the legal systems in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. International human rights standards have had a significant impact on the legal systems in both Lithuania and Seychelles. Both countries have ratified key human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights.
That's great to know. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the future of individual rights and freedoms in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I think it's worth noting that both Lithuania and Seychelles are committed to upholding individual rights and freedoms. However, there are still challenges to be addressed. particularly in terms of ensuring that these rights are protected in practice.
That's a great point. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about how they can get involved in promoting individual rights and freedoms in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. There are many ways to get involved, including volunteering with civil society organizations or advocating for reforms to the country's laws and policies.
That's a great way to get involved. Leo, and finally, I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the unique cultural practices and traditions that shape the legal systems in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. In Lithuania, for example, there is a strong tradition of respect for authority and the law. This is reflected in the country's legal system, which emphasizes the importance of social order and public safety.
That's fascinating. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would appreciate knowing more about the role of traditional justice systems in Seychelles. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. In Seychelles, traditional justice systems play an important role in resolving disputes and maintaining social order. However, there are also challenges to be addressed, particularly in terms of ensuring that these systems are fair and accessible to all citizens.
That's a great point. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about the relationship between the two countries' legal systems. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I think it's worth noting that both Lithuania and Seychelles have made significant strides in promoting individual rights and freedoms. However, there are still challenges to be addressed, particularly.
I'm so dived into the world of spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Lithuania and Seychelles. Both countries offer a unique blend of traditional and modern wellness practices that are sure to rejuvenate your mind, body, and spirit. Let's start with Lithuania, a country known for its stunning natural beauty and rich cultural heritage. What's your take on the spa scene in Lithuania? Leo?
Lithuania is a hidden gem when it comes to spas. The country has a long tradition of sauna culture, and you'll find traditional wooden saunas, or sauna as the locals call them, in almost every village. In fact, the Finns might have started the sauna craze, but the Lithuanians have perfected it.
That's hilarious. Leo, I'm glad you're enthusiastic about Lithuania's spa scene. Speaking of which, have you ever tried a traditional Lithuanian sauna experience? I've heard it's a real treat.
Well, I've had my fair share of sauna experiences, but I've never been to a traditional Lithuanian sauna. I think I'll have to add that to my bucket list. But I'm curious. Mira, what makes Lithuania's spa scene so unique?
That's a great question. Leo, Lithuania's spa scene is all about embracing the country's natural beauty and rich cultural heritage. From the stunning lakes and forests to the vibrant cities, there's no shortage of breathtaking landscapes to explore. And when it comes to spas, you'll find a range of traditional and modern options that cater to every need and budget.
I see. So, it's all about embracing nature and tradition. That's really cool. And what about Seychelles? I've heard it's a tropical paradise with some amazing spa resorts.
Oh, Seychelles is indeed a tropical paradise, Leo. And yes, the spa resorts are top-notch. But what's really unique about Seychelles is its focus on holistic wellness. The country has a rich cultural heritage that emphasizes the importance of balance and harmony in life. You'll find a range of traditional and modern wellness practices that cater to every need and budget.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I can imagine the beautiful beaches and crystal clear waters of Seychelles are the perfect backdrop for a relaxing spa experience. And what about the local cuisine? I've heard it's a fusion of African, European, and Asian flavors.
Oh, Leo, you're really getting into the spirit of things. Yes, the local cuisine in Seychelles is a fusion of flavors, and it's absolutely delicious. But let's get back to the spa scene. Have you ever tried a traditional Seychelles massage? Leo?
Well, I've had my fair share of massages, but I've never tried a traditional Seychelles massage. But I'm curious. Mira, what makes it so special?
That's a great question. Leo, A traditional Seychelles massage is all about relaxation and rejuvenation. The therapists use a range of techniques, including aromatherapy and hot stone therapy, to melt away tension and leave you feeling relaxed and refreshed.
That sounds amazing. Mira, I think I need to add Seychelles to my spa bucket list.
I'm glad you're. Leo? And speaking of excitement, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the spa scene in Lithuania and Seychelles. Do you think one country offers better spa experiences than the other? Let us know in the comments.
Well, I think it's hard to compare the two countries. Mira, each has its unique charm and attractions. But if I had to choose, I'd say Seychelles has a slight edge when it comes to relaxation and rejuvenation.
Ah, that's a great point. Leo, Seychelles does offer a unique blend of relaxation and rejuvenation. But I think Lithuania has its own unique charm and attractions. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode on the spa scene in both countries and compare them in more detail.
Sounds like a plan. Mira, and speaking of plans, I'm curious to know what our listeners think about the spa scene in both countries. Do you have any favorite spa resorts or wellness practices that you'd recommend? Let us know in the comments.
I think that's all for today's episode on spa, healthy living, and relaxation opportunities in Lithuania and Seychelles. Thanks for joining us, Leo, and thanks to our listeners for tuning in. So, let's talk about Lithuania and Seychelles, two countries with unique approaches to spirituality and faith. I'm curious, Leo, what's your take on Lithuania's relationship with its past?
Yes. Lithuania has a rich history, and its people are deeply rooted in their Catholic heritage. But what's fascinating is how the country's past has shaped its present, especially when it comes to its approach to spirituality. I mean, have you ever been to the Hill of Crosses?
Actually, I haven't, but I've heard it's a must-see. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about it. What's the story behind this hill, Leo?
Well, the Hill of Crosses is a symbol of Lithuania's struggle for independence and its people's faith. It's a place where thousands of crosses have been erected, and it's a powerful reminder of the country's resilience. And speaking of resilience, I'm reminded of Seychelles' unique blend of Africa, French, and British influences.
Oh, yes. Seychelles is a melting pot of cultures, and its people are known for their warm hospitality. I've heard that the Seychelles are deeply spiritual, but in a more relaxed and laid-back way compared to Lithuania.
Exactly. Seychelles has a more relaxed approach to spirituality, which is reflected in its beautiful beaches, crystal clear waters, and lush forests. But what's interesting is how the country's different cultures have influenced its approach to faith. For example, the Seychelles people have a strong tradition of ancestor worship.
Ancestor worship? That's fascinating. I've never heard of that before. Can you tell us more about it, Leo?
Well, in Seychelles, the people believe that their ancestors continue to play an active role in their lives, and they often seek guidance and protection from it. It's a beautiful way of honoring one's heritage and connecting with the past.
I see what you mean. It's like Lithuania's approach to its Catholic heritage is more formal and structured, whereas Seychelles' approach to spirituality is more relaxed and intuitive. But what about freedom of religion in both countries? How do they compare?
That's a great question. Mira, both countries have a high degree of freedom of religion, but Seychelles is more tolerant of different faiths and cultures. In fact, Seychelles has a long history of interfaith dialogue and cooperation.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm sure our listeners would agree that tolerance and understanding are essential for building a harmonious society. But what about community support for spiritual growth in both countries? How do they compare?
Well, both countries have a strong sense of community, but Seychelles has a more informal approach to community support. For example, the Seychelles people often come together for festivals and celebrations, which are an important part of their spiritual lives.
I see what you mean. It's like Lithuania has a more formal approach to community support, whereas Seychelles has a more relaxed and spontaneous approach. But what about opportunities for spiritual growth in both countries? Are there any unique programs or initiatives that stand out?
Ah, yes, in Seychelles. There's a wonderful program called the Seychelles Spiritual Retreat, which offers a chance for people to connect with nature and with themselves. And in Lithuania, there's the beautiful Taxation Island Castle, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a place of great spiritual significance.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I'm sure our listeners would love to know more about these programs and initiatives. And speaking of unique programs, I'm curious. Leo, what about Lithuania's approach to spirituality and technology?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, Lithuania is actually quite forward when it comes to technology and spirituality. For example, the country has a number of apps and online platforms that help people connect with their faith and with others.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like Seychelles has a more traditional approach to spirituality, whereas Lithuania is more modern and tech-savvy. But what about the role of women in both countries? How do they contribute to spiritual growth and community support?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in both countries, women play a vital role in spiritual growth and community support. In Seychelles, women are often the ones who lead the way in interfaith dialogue and cooperation.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like women in Seychelles are more empowered to take on leadership roles, whereas in Lithuania, women's roles may be more traditional. But what about the impact of tourism on spirituality in both countries? How do tourists affect the spiritual landscape?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in both countries, tourism can have both positive and negative impacts on the spiritual landscape. For example, in Seychelles, tourism can help to promote cultural exchange and understanding, but it can also lead to the erosion of traditional practices and customs.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like tourism can be a double-edged sword, bringing both benefits and challenges. But what about the importance of preserving cultural heritage in both countries? How do they compare?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, both countries place a high value on preserving their cultural heritage, but Seychelles has a more relaxed approach to preserving its traditions and customs.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like Lithuania has a more formal approach to preserving its cultural heritage, whereas Seychelles has a more spontaneous and intuitive approach. But what about the role of faith in shaping national identity in both countries? How do they compare?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in both countries, faith plays a significant role in shaping national identity. But Seychelles has a more inclusive approach to faith and national identity.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like Seychelles has a more welcoming approach to different faiths and cultures, whereas Lithuania has a more formal and structured approach. But what about the importance of community service in both countries? How do they compare?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, both countries place a high value on community service, but Seychelles has a more informal approach to community service.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like Lithuania has a more formal approach to community service, whereas Seychelles has a more spontaneous and intuitive approach. But what about the impact of globalization on spirituality in both countries? How do they compare?
Ah, that's a great question. Mira, in both countries, globalization can have both positive and negative impacts on spirituality. For example, in Seychelles, globalization can lead to the erosion of traditional practices and customs, but it can also bring new ideas and perspectives.
Ah, I see what you mean. It's like globalization can be a double-edged sword, bringing both benefits and... So, let's dive into social equality, respect for minorities, and diversity in Lithuania and Seychelles. I'm curious to see how these countries approach inclusivity. Leo, what do you think is the most striking aspect of Lithuania's social landscape?
Ah, I think it's the country's commitment to LGBTQ rights. Lithuania was one of the first Eastern European countries to legalize same-sex marriage in 2018. The capital city, Vilnius, even hosted a pride parade in 2019, which was a huge success.
That's amazing. And I'm sure our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me that this is a significant step towards social equality. But what about minority groups in Seychelles? How do they fare in terms of representation and protection?
Actually, Seychelles has made significant strides in promoting diversity and inclusivity. The country has a diverse population, with different ethnic groups, including Creoles, Seychelles of European descent, and people of Indian and Chinese origin. The government has implemented policies to promote equality and protect minority rights.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the cultural celebrations in Seychelles. Do you have any favorite festivals or events that showcase the country's rich cultural heritage?
Yes. The Seychelles Creole Festival is a highlight of the year. It celebrates the country's Creole culture with music, dance, and traditional food. And, of course, who can forget the Carnival International de Victoria, which is a vibrant celebration of diversity and inclusivity.
I can almost smell the coconut and spices. But seriously, it's wonderful to see how both countries are working towards social equality and respect for minorities. What do you think is the key to achieving this level of inclusivity?
Well, I think it's all about education and awareness. Both countries have implemented programs to promote cultural awareness and understanding, which has helped to break down barriers and foster greater empathy between different communities.
That makes sense. And I'm sure our listeners would agree that education is a powerful tool in promoting social equality. But what about grassroots efforts in both countries? Are there any initiatives that stand out to you?
Yes. In Lithuania, there's a wonderful organization called the Lithuanian Gay League, which works tirelessly to promote LGBTQ rights and visibility. And in Seychelles, there's a group called the Seychelles Association for Persons with Disabilities, which advocates for the rights of people with disabilities.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's heartening to see these grassroots efforts making a real difference in people's lives. I'm curious to know more about the role of women in both countries. How do they fare in terms of representation and empowerment?
Well, in Seychelles, women have made significant strides in politics and business. The country has had several female presidents and has a high percentage of women in parliament. And in Lithuania, women's rights are also protected by law, although there is still more work to be done to achieve true equality.
That's great to hear. And I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing more about the cultural traditions and customs in both countries. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. In Lithuania, traditional folk music and dance are a big part of the country's cultural heritage. And in Seychelles, the Creole culture is a unique blend of African, European, and Asian influences, with a strong emphasis on music, dance, and storytelling.
I love it. It's wonderful to see how both countries are preserving their cultural heritage while also promoting inclusivity and diversity. Well, that's all for this criterion. I'm curious to know what our listeners think about social equality and respect for minorities in these two countries. If you have any thoughts or opinions, please let us know in the comments. So, let's talk about taxation in Lithuania. I'm sure our listeners living in this country would agree with me that the tax system can be quite complex. But, in general, Lithuania has a relatively low tax burden compared to other European countries.
That's right, Mira. And did you know that Lithuania has a flat tax rate of 20% for both personal income and corporate income? It's one of the lowest in the EU.
Yes. And what about the value-added tax? Or VAT? Lithuania has a standard VAT rate of 21%. But there are also reduced rates for certain goods and services.
Exactly. And speaking of taxes, let's talk about Seychelles. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about the tax system in Seychelles. Do you guys think it's more or less complex than Lithuania's?
Well, Seychelles has a unique tax system with a combination of income tax, VAT, and other levies. That overall, it's considered to be relatively straightforward.
That's interesting. And did you know that Seychelles has a tax-free zone for certain businesses and individuals? It's called the International Financial Services Zone.
Wow, that sounds like a great opportunity for entrepreneurs and investors. But what about retirement and social rights for long-term immigrants in both countries?
Ah, yes. Well, in Lithuania, long-term residents can access the country's social security system, including healthcare and pension benefits.
That's great to know. And in Seychelles, what about the pension system? I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing how it works.
Actually, Seychelles has a non-contributory pension scheme for citizens and permanent residents. It's not means tested, but it does require a minimum period of residence.
That's good to know. And what about healthcare in Seychelles? Is it easily accessible for long-term residents?
Yes, Seychelles has a well-developed healthcare system, with both public and private hospitals, and long-term residents are entitled to access these services, including medical treatment and hospitalization.
That's great to hear. And in Lithuania, what about social safety nets for long-term immigrants? Are there any programs in place to support them?
Yes. Lithuania has a range of social safety nets, including unemployment benefits, housing benefits, and other forms of assistance.
That's reassuring to know. And finally, let's talk about the overall cost of living in both countries. I'm sure our listeners would be interested in knowing how it compares.
Yes. Well, the cost of living in Lithuania is generally lower than in Seychelles. But Seychelles has a more tropical climate, which can make it a more attractive destination for some people.
That's a great point. Leo, and I'm sure our listeners would agree that both countries have their own unique charms and attractions. If you think this is wrong, please let us know in the comments.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more content like this. We'll be back soon with another exciting episode.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast. We're discussing the rate of meeting specific interests in Lithuania and Seychelles. What do you guys think is more challenging? Finding a community for a niche hobby or finding a country that fits your lifestyle? Leo, what are your thoughts on this?
Great question. Mira, I think it's more challenging to find a country that fits your lifestyle. You can always find a niche community online, but if the country itself doesn't have the right vibe, it's hard to adapt. For example, if you're a beach lover, Seychelles is an obvious choice, but if you're a city person, Lithuania might be more up your alley.
That's a great point. Leo, I'm certain that our listeners living in Lithuania would agree with me. But what about niche hobby clubs? Do they exist in Lithuania? And if so, how do they compare to Seychelles?
Yes. Lithuania has a thriving community of enthusiasts, from rock climbing to chess clubs. I've even heard of a group that meets to play vintage video games. It's amazing how dedicated people are to their hobbies.
Wow, that sounds like a dream come true for gamers. I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about this. Do you guys have any experience with niche hobby clubs in Lithuania or Seychelles? If so, share your stories in the comments below.
I think it's great that you're encouraging our listeners to share their experiences. Mira, speaking of experiences, have you ever tried to find a community of people who share your passion for hiking in Seychelles? I've heard it's not easy to find like-minded people there.
Actually, Leo, I have. I met a group of fellow hikers while I was on a trip to Seychelles, and we had an amazing time exploring the island together. It just goes to show that even in a small country, there are still opportunities to meet like-minded people.
That's fantastic. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your hiking adventures in Seychelles. Maybe you can share some tips on how to find a hiking community there.
Absolutely. Leo, I'd be happy to share some tips. But before I do, let me ask our listeners, what do you think is the key to finding a community of like-minded people? Whether it's in Lithuania or Seychelles, do you think it's about joining online groups, attending local events, or something else entirely?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think it's a combination of all three. You need to be proactive and put yourself out there, whether it's online or in person. And sometimes, You just need to take a chance and attend an event or join a group that seems interesting, even if you're not sure if it's the right fit.
I love that advice. Leo, it's all about being open-minded and willing to take risks. And speaking of risks, have you ever tried to attend a cultural event in Lithuania? Leo, I've heard they can be quite interesting.
Ah, yes, I have. And let me tell you, it was an experience I'll never forget. But in all seriousness, I think cultural events are a great way to meet people and learn about their interests. And in Lithuania, you can find everything from folk music festivals to art exhibitions.
That sounds amazing. Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about cultural events in Lithuania. Do you guys have any favorite cultural events or traditions that you'd like to share?
I think it's great that you're asking our listeners to share their experiences. Mira, and speaking of experiences, have you ever tried to find a community of people who share your passion for sailing in Seychelles? I've heard it's a popular activity there.
Actually, Leo, I have. I met a group of fellow sailors while I was on a trip to Seychelles, and we had an amazing time exploring the island together. It just goes to show that even in a small country, there are still opportunities to meet like-minded people.
That's fantastic. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your sailing adventures in Seychelles. Maybe you can share some tips on how to find a sailing community there.
Absolutely. Leo, I'd be happy to share some tips. But before I do, let me ask our listeners, what do you think is the key to finding a community of like-minded people? Whether it's in Lithuania or Seychelles? Do you think it's about joining online groups, attending local events, or something else entirely?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think it's a combination of all three. You need to be proactive and put yourself out there, whether it's online or in person. And sometimes, you just need to take a chance and attend an event or join a group that seems interesting, even if you're not sure if it's the right fit.
I love that advice. Leo, it's all about being open-minded and willing to take risks. And speaking of risks, have you ever tried to attend a food festival in Seychelles? Leo? I've heard they have the most amazing seafood.
Ah, yes, I have. And let me tell you, it was an experience I'll never forget. But in all seriousness, I think food festivals are a great way to meet people and learn about their interests. And in Seychelles, you can find everything from seafood markets to artisanal food stalls.
That sounds amazing. Leo, I'm actually curious about what our listeners think about food festivals in Seychelles. Do you guys have any favorite food festivals or traditions that you'd like to share?
I think it's great that you're asking our listeners to share their experiences. Mira, and speaking of experiences, have you ever tried to find a community of people who share your passion for cycling in Lithuania? I've heard it's a popular activity there.
Actually, Leo, I have. I met a group of fellow cyclists while I was on a trip to Lithuania, and we had an amazing time exploring the countryside together. It just goes to show that even in a small country, there are still opportunities to meet like-minded people.
That's fantastic. Mira, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about your cycling adventures in Lithuania. Maybe you can share some tips on how to find a cycling community there.
Absolutely. Leo, I'd be happy to share some tips. But before I do, let me ask our listeners, what do you think is the key to finding a community of like-minded people? Whether it's in Lithuania or Seychelles, do you think it's about joining online groups, attending local events, or something else entirely?
That's a tough question. Mira, I think it's a combination of all three. You need